It is a Wednesday night here at the Voice of College Football, which means we are on the move. That means you don't have to be. So settle on in, kick back, and enjoy the next 60 plus, whatever it turns out to be. LeeAnn Herring right next to me, and that's a good thing because she's got the knowledge, and we will make it on through with all of you. Leave those comments and questions there in the chat. You have joined On the Move. It's our recruiting and transfer portal update live show with LeeAnn here each and every Wednesday, 8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central. LeeAnn, how you doing tonight?
Doing good. Trying to take a breath because it has been a heck of a 24 hours on the recruiting trail. Of course, we know yesterday on our quick segment, our quick hit of the recruiting coup, we know that now Jackson Cantwell has found a home mark over in South Florida. Talk about a big win for the Miami Hurricanes and Mario Cristobal, landing not only the number one offensive tackle in the 2026 class, but as we like to say, the number one overall athlete, regardless of position, heading to South Florida, bringing a lot to the table. But we talk about now being on top as Miami is looking to stay. What they use, how they use, NIL to gain an advantage, and where they're going to stand. We'll talk a little bit more about who else is coming to South Florida because things are definitely cooking down there for Mario Cristobal and the Canes. The momentum is indeed heightened now with the big commitment from Jackson Cantwell. There's some big names off the board, of course, based out of Texas. Some big athletes getting off the boards, not going too far close from home. And then some other guys we're looking at. We know we're in the heart of official visit season. We're also in the tail end of evaluation season. So, of course, today we know that some of the bigger recruiting companies like 247 are issuing out some new 5-stars. So there's some new 5-stars on the market. We'll be talking about a kid that we talked about last week is building up those offers, has a fresh one from Bill Belichick out at UNC. We talked a little bit more about the Ole Miss Rebels looking to still navigate through their QB room, looking through the transfer portal, and also trying to get back in the thick of things with one of the top 26 quarterbacks that we've talked a lot about. And South Florida is not the only place cooking, Mark, in the Sunshine State. There's a lot going on down in Gainesville. We talked a little bit about some of the things that are heading into the weekend. We know that a lot of programs having big recruiting weekends. We kind of hit yesterday on our quick hit on the recruiting coup. Of course, Georgia may have lost out in a big way, not getting that commitment from Jackson Cantwell. But again, they're gearing up to kind of rework things and looking to make a big splash with their big recruiting weekend this weekend. Of course, we know a lot of playmakers will be heading to Athens for the annual scavenger hunt, kind of kicking off this new recruiting period. As far as heading into the summer, we know now that this season summer recruiting will look a lot different. It won't go into July. The bulk of things will be happening here at the end of May with official visits, and of course those first 3 weeks in June will be filtered with plenty of camps. So let's get to it.
We are going to work through the news, folks, but keep in mind that the call-in line is available there in the chat. Again, we're going to hit some of these major items, but we want to get to your calls as well. So give us a ring. We'll start with this one. We know that it's been much reported that Texas has broken the bank to finance its 2025 football roster, but of course, the pockets are deep in Texas, so they can go beyond that to 2026 and 27, and they'll just keep going from there. And they have locked in a playmaker when we talk about Jermaine Bishop, who racked up 83 catches this past season in high school, and he is headed to Austin.
He is officially a Longhorn. There was plenty of suitors in the mix. We know that Houston was a big playmaker early on. We thought with the he plays 7-on-7 where Keyshawn Henderson. So we knew that Houston was going to be making a pull. Of course, USC was another top name, but he didn't go far too away from Willis, Texas. You guys have heard me talk a lot about Willis, Texas. From the jump, Jermaine Bishop was one of DJ Lagway's go-to guys as soon as he stepped foot back in 2022, being a playmaker back since a freshman. There was a lot of question once DJ Lagway headed up to the college ranks as a Florida Gator. Would Jermaine Bishop be able to continue this just amazing athletic gifts that he's got. You've heard me say when I talk about DJ Lagway, there's something in that Willis water. There indeed is. I'm telling you, the Willis water, there has to be something in it because it continues to produce playmakers like Lagway, and now Jermaine Bishop is not far behind. I've had the opportunity to watch Jermaine Bishop not only this past off season on the 7-on-7 circuit, of course, playing with DEF CON aside Keyshawn Henderson, but I've also had the opportunity to watch him the last couple years. Like I said, be DJ Lagway's go-to guy. But this is a guy who not only excels. We talk a lot about, some of his big plays being on wide receiver, but this is another dynamic two-way player that very much well has the opportunity to be another Travis Hunter with a ton of high ceilings. He just, like I said, when he takes the field, it's been really interesting to see him on the 7-on-7 circuit. He's another reason why my oldest son was keeping up with OT7 because Jermaine Bishop would come with I think the last costume I saw him was a Batman. I mean, this kid is just, not only is he full of talent, he's just full of spark, but he's just one of those true football virtuosos when you see him take the field. Like I said, whether he's playing on the offensive side of the ball, or of course, like we see here, is a standout corner, he just dazzles, and he really stands out as one of the players, not just in the state of Texas, but in this recruiting class, that really it just brings a purity back to the skill set of football. And I think that he just showcases just a jaw-dropping production when he hits the field, whether, like I said, whether he's playing offense or defense, he's going to put up numbers. And remember, he's competing in one of the toughest conferences in the state of Texas in 6A. And let me just go over his numbers. Like I said, he's been making waves since he was a freshman back. But let me go back to date. I won't start as a freshman, but I have his sophomore numbers here, Mark. And I mean, talk about electrifying. During his sophomore season, that's when he made that transition from corner to receiver. But again, whenever he touched the ball, whether he was trying to take it away or make plays, he has big playmaking ability. He finished his sophomore season with 1,400 yards for 80 receptions, 17 touchdowns, 26 carries, 384 rushing yards, Mark, and 7 touchdowns. He also, on the other side of the ball, like I said, when he hits the ball, things are going to happen. On the other side of the ball, he had 37 total tackles, 8 PBUs, 5 INTs, 2 tackles for loss, and 1 pick six on the other side of the ball, like I said. And he also just to throw that in there, Mark, he also happened to get a return for a touchdown. And that was his sophomore season. And that's when he had DJ Lagway on board. So there was, in the Texas circuit, having watched him, there was a big kind of gray area. Could Jermaine Bishop be that guy without his go-to guy, DJ Lagway? And come junior season, Mark, he definitely proved any naysayer wrong. He is just an athlete. He continued to surge even to this past year. Talk about continuing putting up unreal numbers. This past season as a junior, even without DJ Lagway, I got to see him in the heart of the playoffs against DeSoto and some other teams there in Dallas. He finished the season, Mark, with 83 receptions, roughly 1,500 receiving yards, 18 touchdowns, averaging 18.9 yards per catch. He also rushed for 45 yards, scored another score on 6 carries. On the other side of the ball, 26 total tackles, 6 PBUs, 3 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, and another kickoff return. So again, this is a kid that's well on his way, not only to set records in his program, but if he keeps going the way that he's going to be making the record books and making history as one of the top elite players when it comes to returning in Texas high school football. So again, Jermaine Bishop, I can't even speak it enough. This is a kid that lives up to his billing, 5-star talent. He's been doing it as a freshman on 2 sides of the bar. So yes, while we've been talking about Travis Hunter a lot, you're about to get to know Jermaine Bishop, because Jermaine Bishop is the next two-way dynamic player, definitely oozing of that Willis water, continuing up once again. But like I said, this is a kid that no matter where you put him, he has playmaking ability. He's going to cause chaos on offense, on defense, and even on special teams. So talk about a huge win for the Texas Longhorns, not only using that bankroll and building that that million highfalutin roster that we know that Texas money can do. But talk about securing talent right in their backyard. They didn't have to go too far. But even though this will be another recruitment that I think will continue to surge, because despite his commitment to Texas earlier today, Jermaine Bishop is still going to be taking some officials. He's going to be taking, let me get those dates up there. He's still planning to take his first visit that first week of June to USC. So he's going to head out to SoCal. Again, Houston, if there was ever anybody who could get in the mix, Houston's one of those schools that's been with him from the jump. He's going to be taking in Houston in the Cougar program 13th through the 15th of June. And then, of course, heading back to his new home, Texas, as a Longhorn during the 22nd. So again, this is a recruitment, especially with the kind of dynamics that you're going to get. This is a kid that's going to be an instant impact player. He's been doing it and proving it each time on. Even though he has a thinner frame as far, he could still bulk up a lot of it. But again, his skill set, his dynamics on both sides of the ball, Mark, are undeniable. Like I said, he's just a phenom when it comes to playing as a two-way player. So this is a kid that I expect that Houston to USC will still continue to heavily recruit. So I do not think that this recruitment's over. But for right now, he's locked in down in Austin with Coach Sark and the Texas Longhorns.
You are on the move with LeeAnn and myself. It's a Wednesday night, and this is our permanent home. Wednesdays, 8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central. We love the chat. We see George. We see a lot of great names and faces here. Tukey G included. Kevin Chafis, good to see you. The Real MVP and others. And Jackson on for the ride as well. And we know that guy that watches us on a regular basis, Michael Campbell, is going to be very interested and very happy about this latest update, which involves a Notre Dame at running back and Jonas Walton, who's coming to South Bend.
The luck of the Irish continues to strike when it comes to the running back position. Marcus Freeman has another elite running back heading to this 2026 class down in South Bend. Again, we're talking about them trying to continue to build a step roster, and they definitely landed it early today in running back Jonas Walton. Of course, we know earlier they also landed another elite Texas running back in Javian Osborne. I really like what they're doing down here with this running back room down in South Bend. I mean, talk about a two-punch brewing in South Bend. This marks the 16th commitment for the Irish in this class. As you can see, the number 10 overall running back to come out of Central High School down in Carrollton, Georgia. When you're talking about another strong breeding ground as far as talent, Georgia and especially Carrollton is one of those places. So again, he had a tremendous junior season, rushing for 1,387 yards, Mark, with 14 touchdowns, with just 188 carries. He also had roughly 39 receptions for 646 yards and 4 scores. And he was one of those guys who was a rush over 1,000 yards as a freshman and a sophomore. So again, through his first seasons as high school, he's been a heck of a playmaker, having over 567 carries for 4,714 yards, 56 rushing scores, 66 receptions, 7 touchdowns on 953 yards. And then, of course, another dynamic player on the return team, where he had 3 kickoff returns for touchdowns, again bringing his total overall career score in his last 3 seasons down at Central in Carrollton, Georgia, to 66. This is a kid, like I said, he oozes production when he hits a thing, and he's another physical, dynamic running back. Had first team offensive honors, was a Max Prep sophomore All-American in 2023, and he was also a Max Prep freshman All-American in 2022. Like I said, this is a kid who it just has a dynamic punch, and he also is a star on track and field as a runner-up in the Georgia 4A championship in the 100-meter dash. So again, another dynamic running back heading to South Bend. I think I'm really excited. If you were ever going to pick top 2 running backs, Marcus Freeman definitely did it with the 1-2 punch, and now getting Jonas Walton to to be the yin to the yang for Javarius down there in South Bend. So again, a lot of good things brewing, and the luck of the Irish strikes again, and they've stricken gold in that running back room for 2026.
All right, LeeAnn, of course, with all this huge news all over the map, the biggest of the week has, of course, been concerning Miami and getting the command out of offensive tackle Jackson Cantrell. So we just came from the Miami show, and I got to tell you, those Miami fans are hyped. They are ready to roll, and they are emotional about this to the extent that Cam Underwood and I from State of the U, we've been doing, let's see, we're on show number 426. And I just posed a situation basically in which maybe Jackson Cantwell wouldn't necessarily meet the mark and pay the dividends of the investment if he just becomes a decent player. And maybe they could have spread out their investment and targeted some other positions. And wow, I was basically, my opinion was called asinine, that Jackson Cantrell is a no miss, zero miss, can't miss offensive tackle on the left side, and will start immediately as a freshman at Miami. But of course, he is the guy and has been across the board the number one rated player in the country. I think he still holds that across the board on the 247 Sports Composite, although they've dropped him somewhat in their rankings for whatever reason to a top 10 player. But yeah, he has been the target, and Miami got him.
We talked about it. We broke it down. You guys can tune over into the Miami show if you missed that to get the breakdown. So I'm not going to waste too much time on what we see. It's always a question, and that's the question we talk about, especially we talk portal time and everything. When you get elite talent like Hanwell, is he going to translate? Having watched him, having seen him, am I certain that he's going to translate from the jump? I believe that he will translate and be an instant impact player, but I still think he will have growing pains like any new freshman rookie talent, adapting and adjusting. I think Miami's putting in a good investment here. But I think really what I wanted to talk about it in regards to Miami is, this is a one of the few recruitments as far as a 5-star where I believe that NIL was transparent. There was no question that the Cantwell party and camp was no secret what kind of money they were looking for. Now, was it the sole factor in this decision? No, but it did play a big factor. NIL moved mountains in this one, like I jokingly said, but it really, I mean, when you're talking to other fellow national media, talking to sources and everything, we all said it. Don't call him unless you are willing to put $2 million on the table. And Miami very well, didn't flinch. They didn't falter. And Miami showed here that they had enough investment to overthrow a top tier team. We know Ohio State and Georgia have plenty of money, but like you just mentioned, it's how you're going to have to allocate, because at every year, every recruiting season, every recruiting cycle, every team's got, even though you have the money, you got to fill different voids and fill different needs. And I think Miami, what I've been really interested to see is they really proved yesterday, not only did NIL prevail in this one, but they also were able to go from a lower tier team and overthrow two traditional powerhouses. I mean, you got Ohio State there with a tradition of excellence coming off a natty. You got Georgia there with plenty of natty, with plenty of tradition, but yet at the end of the day, Miami was able to use and swing what they had to their advantage to bring on Jackson Cantwell. And it just kind of is a testament, Mark, to the changing landscape of what recruiting is. If this, like I said, you heard me the day before, I was really set on Georgia. I felt like it checked all the boxes. It was a traditional development, all the things that Cantwell and his camp had been looking for. But at the same time, this is not the recruiting stage we have 5 years ago. I think 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, when we were just in the heart of learning about and navigating through NIL, I think Georgia would have won out of this one. But Miami is also, I believe, taking a chance, unlike Ohio State and Georgia and some other powerhouses, is they got nothing to lose. Mario Cristobal's got nothing to lose. And I think here, what they're also willingness to do is they're taking a chance investing in high school talent. And I think that is saying a lot to what Miami and the vision is for the future. And I think a lot of young guys that are elite like Jackson are using places like Miami and using other places that are non-traditional powerhouses to get the opportunity, not just to be able to be high on that NIL paycheck, but also to develop, but most of all, have the most opportunity to be an instant impact player. Because kids like Cantwell, we don't know in the day and age if they're going to go the full 3 years, if you're going to get them, if they're going to go to the NFL. So there's just so many revolving doors. So it's really, so Miami really showed, yesterday how they used NIL to their advantage and to their leverage to overtake some Ohio State powerhouses and Georgias of the world, who have a long-standing tradition, who have won natties consistently. Miami hasn't been consistent, but again, it just goes to show the changing landscape of what's flying in recruiting.
Absolutely. It was quite the drama and quite the statement made by Jackson Cantwell. And so we know now that the number one left tackle and the number one player in the nation out of Missouri is headed to Miami. And that commitment, I don't believe there's much speculation that that should waver in any way as we head toward December. So, LeeAnn, did you have anything else on your mind regarding the Miami front and what they might be up to?
You did remind me that I went off a little bit on a tangent there, kind of talking to NIL, but now the question is, it's an arms race. At once, like we talked a couple shows ago, Mark, you mentioned about the arms race was getting elite facilities. Now it's getting elite recruiting classes and staying on top. How do you keep this momentum going? And Miami is sure looking to bank. And it's still what's the next move for Miami? So again, a lot of big recruiting still ahead of them, and they are still looking at some players. There's a couple key areas I believe that Mario Cristobal is still looking to hit. Of course, that defensive line, the secondary, and a few other, and at that running back room. But I think overall, the guy, a name that we really should be looking at, that Miami's really looking to, is, like I said, they are wasting no time going for the top guys in this 2026 class. And one guy that I want to watch that I think Miami is really hot on, that we know is high on their board regardless of position, is in that secondary, the number 2 ranked cornerback in Davian and Devon Benjamin. We're hearing that Oregon is really making a big push for them, but Miami is not letting up on this one. And I think that Miami, they've proven and shown that they're willing to go that extra mile, not only in the NIL, but also in the development. And I think that this is going to be an interesting recruiting to watch, how Miami is going to approach it, because again, looking to address that secondary right there out of California, looking to try to pluck him out and bring him out to South Florida. But again, number 2 ranked corner in the country, Davon Benjamin, is definitely on top of that Miami board, and they're going to be going head to head to Oregon. That's a name that I believe that we're going to watch, that recruitment's going to get very tight. Some other guys that I think Miami is going to be looking at to address some needs, we talked a little bit and alluded to it yesterday, is in that running back room, also in that receiver room. They will go head to head to Georgia for coveted running back, number 3 in the country, and Derek Cooper. And also another receiver to look out is the number 5 receiver in the country, and Calvin Russell. I believe that those are the next 2 top guys on that board for Miami, looking to add some depth. That battle for Derek Cooper will go down to the wire. We know that he was one of the names mentioned that was also high up on that Georgia running back room. We know that Miami is still looking to surge in their running back room, and they definitely have the bankroll to prove it. But again, as much as we've talked about the secondary, Mark, as much as we've talked about the receiver rooms getting bulky, I always have to go back. It has been the season of the offensive and defensive linemen. You can't get it done without the big guys up front. And I think another big need that Miami's going to address, and some names to watch out, is that defensive line. There's some key in-state targets, as well as some key out-of-state targets that I think the Canes will also be watching on that board, that are now going to, the focus is going to shift to those guys. Of course, another top guy in the country on the defensive end of the ball, James Johnson. He's the number 1 defensive lineman in the country right now. Kendall Gervil's another name. Edge rusher Ashari Charles. Those are some of the guys that the Hurricanes are looking to keep in their backyard. Some other names that they're going to try to go out for, I believe, is Lamar Brown, Bryce Perry right now. That's a kid that I have watched and maneuver, and that would be a huge pickup for the Hurricanes. But again, there's a lot of other teams, but it looks like Miami will go head to head against with Georgia and Oregon and even Alabama and Texas A&M. But those are just some names that I think are now moving up the board. Now that they've been able to secure Jackson Cantwell, they've secured that NIL. Now I think the focus shifts to some of those names that I mentioned, but the one that I think that really will be the next guy that they're trying to target is the number 2 ranked corner in Devon Benjamin.
We're on the move here on a Wednesday night, of course, right here at the Voice of College Football. So get used to it. Wednesdays at 8:30 Eastern Time. Make it a part of your college football week with myself and LeeAnn Herring. And every day you can catch LeeAnn on Twitter, of course. That's where you can follow all of her work from Cat's Wire and also the Rebel Walk, of course, and right here at the Voice of College Football. All right. There's about 4 times a year, I think I've had these conversations with people from the likes of 247 and otherwise, where they will reevaluate, look at the board, go through their latest information, camp notes, and so forth, and re-rack the lineup. And we're at about that point right now. And some people have become new to the 5-star category, which is rarefied air. There's only about 35 of them in the nation. And one of those guys is Joey O'Brien out of Pennsylvania.
Joey O'Brien, as you know, the counterpart for Gavin Sador. We talked a little bit about him a couple months ago when we were out there in early April, of course, at the OT7. He was leveling up with his team, no doubt. When I saw that kid, he just had a dynamic moment. It was only a matter of time that I knew that Joey O'Brien was already picking up steam, but now he's got that 5th star out of LaSalle in Pennsylvania. This is just a kid that's just really lanky in his perimeter. He's a dynamic athlete. He's got great ball skills, Mark, his agility. He's just going to leave a mark. He's going to leave everyone smoke in the dust. Again, like I said, he's played multiple positions. Another dynamic 2-way player, has got reps as a defensive back. Some other teams are recruiting him as a wide receiver, but regardless of his position, he definitely is a kid that I have watched and seen in those live reps, and it is no question why he's going to translate and why he's earned that 5th star. But I think that there's just a lot of potential in how he knows how to be a dynamic playmaker when it comes to that coverage. He is an ace when it comes to coverage. Again, this is another guy who just is game changing when it comes to creating playmaker when as a playmaker. He doesn't always, like I said, there's one thing when you see him on the 7-on-7 circuit. Like I said, I was up close and personal right there on those sidelines for that one game. I think he had 3 or 4 PBUs and then a run for a touchdown in that. He's just a dynamic player. But even though he's a slender build, he has a great tenacity. Like I said, he's got extreme versatility as a pass catcher. He's one of those guys that he just has that natural ability to flip the field in an instant. We see it here in some of these dynamic plays. He's really acrobatic. I talk about it that when you see him, because of his size, because of his frame, it's easy to mistake him for a tight end. And what you really got to love about him is just how acrobatical he is when he's trying to go. He really knows how to bend his body and use that vertical to his advantage. And like I said, when he goes up against defenders as a route runner, he's just a smooth operator, and he just knows how to that stop and break when it comes to acceleration. Again, at that point of attack when he hits the football, super dynamic. But it is no surprise that Joey O'Brien out of LaSalle has now earned that 5th star. Of course, he's getting ready to head to Penn State. Penn State has been the big favorite, and they continue to be the one with the most momentum heading into this. But again, like we say, as evaluation period gets rumbled up and riled up, we see that 5th star being earned. You can bet that plenty of programs are going to try to get in the late hunt for Joey O'Brien, but Penn State has got the momentum in this one, and rightfully so. This is a kid that a lot of people weren't talking about. And these are a lot of the kids that you hear us talk about. Like I said, we weren't talking about Joey Bryan too far long ago, and now we talk about him earning that 5th star. But again, just another dynamic two-way player, a lot of high ceilings, with a lot of unwavering discipline when it comes to being a dynamic playmaker. So congratulations to Joey O'Brien, and Penn State is on the move to keep them and try to earn themselves a 5-star in this 2026 recruiting cycle.
LeeAnn was with us earlier this week and got us familiar with talented edge in, boy, I'm going to forget how to pronounce his last name, Ezekiel
Ayunbule.
Oh, we'll give that another go. We'll let LeeAnn take off on this one. But Bill Belichick definitely in the hunt for a premier edge rusher.
Well, we were out there last week. Of course, this is a kid that we've been watching for some time, really on the rise. Of course, Houston not too far away, being the first one to get in the mix of it. Texas Tech, Baylor, TCU. We know that there are a couple SEC schools on the verge, like Texas A&M, Texas, and Alabama, looking to pull the trigger. But unfortunately, Bill Belichick has beat them to the punch. Ezekiel, fresh off an offer today from UNC. Again, this is a kid that is playing edge due to the way they run the defense down there at Langham Creek. But we know a lot of programs are looking to possibly recruit him as a defensive tackle, again, already at 6'3", class of 2027, physical frame. He really owns the edge. Like I said, he's a chaos maker already with his size and frame. We talked about his athletic bloodlines. His mom and dad both attending Virginia Tech. His mom was a excelled in track down there, and of course his dad, NFL veteran tackle. This is a kid, like I said, that is going to be on the rise. He's just dynamic when he hits the field. He's a versatile defensive lineman, could easily transition when he hits the field. He defies those laws of physics, as I like, and I've witnessed it firsthand. I think one of the strongest points is when you see him is he just glides effortlessly across the line, and he really has this remarkable agility to anchor down in the trenches, and he really explodes off the edge, like I said, like a coiled spring. Again, he hones in and he follows through. When I was watching him in practice, and we know we can't take a lot away from spring ball, but I watched this kid, we caught him on film, made his assignment, and then quickly ran around, with hone in speed to go try to make another tackle, another big play. So again, I know there's some things, of course, he knows, that transition of trying to get more defensive tackle reps, of course, trying to shave some time off that 40, but make no doubt about it, this is a guy who knows how to dart through blockers. His presence is felt at every snap. He's just going to wreak havoc on every play. So again, this is a guy who just not only ignites on the field, he ignites and resonates with this team. Like I said, with every tackle, with every sack, he's just got this dynamic skill set. So again, what SEC school I'm waiting to hear is going to pull the trigger? Is it going to be Texas A&M, Texas, Alabama? But for right now, the ACC is looking to get in the hunt for a rising talented edge, Ezekiel Ayunbule out of Langham Creek in Houston, Texas. So Bill Belichick recognizes that talent before most people do. So we'll see who gets on board. But for now, the ACC joins in the hunt for this talented edge rusher.
All right, folks, it's time for you to pull the trigger on your most recent home for your college football coverage. The voice of college football, not just on digital, not just on audio, which we just introduced here a few months ago, but vocfb.com. And you can catch articles from Matt Zemek, LeeAnn, the rest of the staff here at the Voice of College Football. So check it out, vocfb.com. Check out those forums where you can mix it up and trash talk with your own fans and rival fans as well at vocfb.com. Give it a look. All right. So much hype and attention around South Florida and Miami and what they're doing and what they will continue to do. But Florida not giving up any territory in the northern part of the state, and they're definitely making some moves on the defensive front in particular.
As the dominoes fall, we've talked a lot about the offensive linemen in this recruiting cycle, but again, many teams looking to just address the needs in the trenches, and Florida is really looking to get some big gains down in Gainesville. These are a couple of defensive linemen that we've talked a little bit about. One in particular we've had on the show early on that plenty of schools were looking at, but both these defensive linemen have trimmed down their list and are looking to make a home. But from what we're hearing, Mark, these are two key defensive linemen that Florida we really feel has a really strong showing for us. Of course, we got the first guy in there, a 4-star defensive lineman, Baldwin Stone. We know that Coach Napier has done a heck of a job really showcasing and making him a priority. And Stone has been there several times. We always say, aside from the other factors, one thing that you really want to look at when you're seeing that recruits are honing in is those visits. And Stone has basically made Gainesville his home away from home. And we're hearing he feels really comfortable there. Of course, we know that some Florida Gators that are on the roster right now share representation with Stone. So those relationships always matter. But the biggest thing we hear, he feels at home. He feels like, the surge again that Florida is kind of having, that revival, that remake, that he could very well play a huge part in that. So that's a name that definitely the Florida Gators are looking to hone in on as a priority target. Another defensive lineman, and some of the schools that are looking at Stone that we're hearing: Auburn, Georgia, Nebraska, Oklahoma. From what we're hearing, while all those schools are very much in the mix, watch out for Nebraska and Oklahoma, really looking to rebuild their defensive lines. But right now, from what we're hearing, we know that Florida is really making Stone a top priority. Again, he's headed back down there for an official visit on June 13th. But this is a kid who's taken plenty of visits down to Gainesville, has relationships not only with the staff, but with other Florida Gators in there. And again, he sees himself the research and the development. So Florida right now checking all those boxes for Stone. But another top guy that we talked about that's not too far away from Gainesville, that we knew that everybody was going to be jumping for, who we've had on the show, is 4-star defensive lineman Preston PJ Carey, of course, IMG. We of course he was an East Coast product, eventually making the way to IMG. But man, when you see this kid we've talked about and we've had him on the show, Ole Miss was one of those that was looking to get in the hunt. He's trimmed down his list, but we're hearing from his camp and from him that the Florida Gators right now, Mark, are really positioning themselves in a strong setting to get this top elite talent right there. Compositely the number 34 defensive lineman in the country, and the number 45th player to come out of Florida. Another physical guy. This is another intelligent recruit looking to take his time. But again, he's trimmed down his list. But this is another name to watch very closely in the recruitment of, I think that these are probably the top 2 defensive guys on that Florida board. But despite both these trimming down their list and still plenty of suitors in the mix, Florida has set itself in a good position, from what we're hearing, to land possibly not 1, but 2 blue chip linemen to add to that defensive front down in Gainesville.
Absolutely. And once again, LeeAnn and I get together every Wednesday night with you, 8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central, on the move. This is our time. This is our night. So we open up the phone lines, and we've got a call coming in from Daryl MVP. Daryl,
hello, how are you two doing this evening?
We're doing
well.
Good.
Always good to have you on. Always good to have you on. So what's cooking? What do you got for us, Daryl?
Thank you. Well, I'm sure you've seen the quote-unquote conspiracy theory controversy since Bishop was ranked number 1 and now he's dropped 10 spots. This clearly means that the SEC, Big Ten, and the Big 24/7 networks are all in cahoots in order to prop up the SEC and Big Ten. I'm sure you all have seen that. So what are your thoughts about this conspiracy theory?
And for me, that's why I'm not a fan of rankings, and all, whether it be team rankings, especially rankings for recruits. The dominoes did fall. I know that we had another comment earlier about after the commitment of Jackson Cantwell. I believe it's Felix Ojo that's probably, I believe, moved up to the ranks as the #1 offensive tackle now. And then Cantwell dropping with his commitment to Miami. It's always interesting to see. We know that 247 was dropping their new composite 5 stars and their new composite rankings. So for me, I take it lightly, Darrell. When I see these kids in person, and Jermaine Bishop is a kid that I've not only been watching, since he got in the hype. This is a kid that I've been watching for over, his 3 seasons down in Willis, Texas. Like I said, when no one was talking about DJ Lagway, when no one was talking about Jermaine Bishop, I saw something special in these kids, along with a lot of the other Texas media that has been watching, is very familiar with me. I just think it's a little bit of sensationalism as these kids go off to certain programs. I think they either go higher up the ranks or they get lower off the ranks. I take it for a grain of salt. Rankings are rankings. Like I always tell these kids that I work with and I recruit with, it's great to have those stars and everything, but they don't mean anything when it comes down to it. It's the talent that translates. So, Cadwell may have gone down, and Jermaine Bishop, if he went down, it says what it says. But personally speaking, on Jermaine Bishop, this is a kid that is a freak beyond means. I've seen him personally. I've watched him over years. So if he goes down in the rankings, it sucks. But at the same time, I guarantee you, it is not a sincere evaluation. Anyone who's watched him, including the national analysts in live reps, in game situations, know that it really doesn't matter where that kid lands. He's going to be something productive, and it's a testament to Remain that why other schools will be trying to flip him in these later summer months, heading into his December, before he signs with Texas officially.
Mark, she's taking it from the athletics perspective, but what are your thoughts about it from the fan perspective of everything's a conspiracy theory against my conference, my team, my coach,
Well, when it comes to these
Mark,
recruiting
I was going to say,
rankings,
Mark can take that one. Yeah, Mark, take
when
that
it comes to these recruiting rankings, I believe that 247 on 3 on down the line, that they're doing their jobs. They're professionals. However, is there a business aspect to this? Yes, there's a business aspect to this. So I think that they're legitimately scouting. They're legitimately doing their best, and we have to understand that different writers and different scouts cover different regions of the country. So then they have to come together, and obviously they're going to typically favor their region of the country. It's just like a Heisman vote. It's been statistically proven over time that the writers in the area of the country that they cover typically vote for a Heisman winner out of their region. I think it's I've talked to, we had Tom Luganbill on here. We've had other recruiting analysts on here that admit, they bring somebody from the Northeast, the Northwest, the South, et cetera, to the table. And then they start to argue over whose guys is better. And, they wage war on that. And I think that that's all legitimate, healthy discussion. But these outfits also know what fan base has moved the needle. They do know what players, if they're off the board, are going to move the needle. If the #1 player in the country is off the board, as opposed to the #1 player deep in the recruiting process is still on the board and is between 4 and 5 schools, that's going to help business. So there is a business factor to it.
Okay, that's good to hear because, people just like to find a coping mechanism, and I believe that's what this is about. Hey, maybe people can change their mind. We should show a little grace that people thought one thing and then they think another thing after seeing more evidence. That's just my opinion. We can't have that in society nowadays. Everybody's got to have their flag planted down in one opinion, and you have to live by that opinion literally till the day you die, regardless of the evidence you see going forward. But I want to also talk about, I'm not sure if you all saw the Ross Dellinger report. This could impact recruiting a bit with the automatic qualifiers. Have you all seen that report? There's some scuffle about it.
Is it anything different than what's been reported in the past?
Yes. Instead of the 442213 model, they're going to do potentially a 443311 model. So the ACC and Big 12 would get 3 automatic qualifiers.
Really?
Yeah, that's been reported. That's what the ACC commissioner is pushing for today. I understand why he's pushing for it.
Sounds like yeah, absolutely. They get 3 automatic bids. They only got 2 last year, and the Big 12 only got 1.
Right, I
If
understand.
if last season would have played out, then we would have BYU in the playoff, and we would have had, well, of course, we would have 16 teams, but we would have BYU in the playoff and Iowa State, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know how healthy it is for the sport going forward to have 15 out of the 16 playoff bids be determined by automatic qualifiers. I think there should be some level of subjectivity involved. I mean, a fourth of the schedule is non-conference games, and just to basically tell every single team in the country, hey, those games literally don't matter at all. It's going to be something.
Subjectivity is going to be in the rankings. So
Right.
it all depends as to whether we're talking about the top 4 teams in the Big Ten based on Big Ten standings, or are we talking about the top 4 teams based on the committee's rankings, and likewise in the other conferences? Those are 2 completely different sets. They could be 2 completely different sets of lists.
They could be, but they're going to have large overlap. Like Ohio State's, there's no scenario where Ohio State's top 4 in the Big Ten and they're not top 4 in the college football playoff rankings. But in my opinion, like, I just don't like the amount of automatic qualifier bids given out. We don't need to give the third best ACC team and the third best Big 12 team
No, we don't.
a guaranteed playoffs. They don't belong in the playoffs. They're playing a different sport.
Well,
we don't need to validate them.
Well, let's at least see it play out on the field, and we can properly evaluate whether they belong in the playoffs.
I agree with that.
That's what I'm pushing for. If we've hired a committee to do their job, and even though I've been critical of the system, I think the committee has largely done its job in 11 years. And of course, during the 14 playoff era, it hasn't been a difficult job for the most part. It pretty much has selected itself. Now that we've gone to 12 teams and now 16, it's there's a lot more nuance there. But if they're going to pack them into basically a self-selection from each league, then the committee is basically just seeding the teams is what they're doing.
Right. That's exactly what would happen if this new model would be introduced going forward. And I agree with you, Mark, 100% that we shouldn't have any automatic qualifier bids. I'm against them. But it seems like we are destined to have automatic qualifying bids because, you are what your record says you are. That's what the committee believes. And, the SEC and Big Ten doesn't like that.
Well, I want the conference champions to be in a 16-team field. I have no issue with that. But past that, no, we don't need AQs.
Okay. Do you think in terms of recruiting, this would balance out the field if we went to this new model?
Well, I think it helps.
I mean, I think I think that right now in the state of recruiting, there's just so many different open doors and avenues. And I think that, like Mark said, I think it'll help a little bit, but it's hard to tell from the jump without actually implanting it and seeing where it goes. Like, I think that right now with recruiting, there's just so many revolving doors, changing factors that haven't really got a hold on. And I think before we start moving that into that shift, it kind of changes the dynamic.
Yeah, there's a lot that needs to be tackled under the sport in general. I saw Nick Saban, for example, today say he doesn't even know why he's the co-chair of the committee that President Donald Trump put him part. He's like, I don't understand what this committee's supposed to do or why it even exists. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because I caught that earlier today. He got a lot. I wrote an article about it, when it was initially coming out, and he was getting a lot of criticism between him and Trump that this was just another act of him trying to be self-serving and still be involved in the sport and everything. But again, like you said today, he went out there and he really addressed it, kind of shared on his point of view how this really all came about, how the so-called commission really got into fruition. And it was just but again, he talked a little bit about it today, that he just really doesn't know if this is what college sports needs, is a commission per se. I think that there has to be, and he talked about, there's things that need to be tackled. He readdressed the idea of, he believes in having NIL and name, image, and likeness, but again, he went back, of course, to advocate that he doesn't really believe in, pay for play and all these other things. So he went back and hit those Nick Saban values that I think had been kind of hit with this sudden announcement of this commission, but he reaffirmed it, and I can understand. I think right now to try to tackle the whole dynamic, Daryl, of college sports with having one commission with a former elite head coach in Nick Saban and then a very high profile booster, when those are the things that you're trying to regulate, might not be the answer for it. There's just so many things to tackle. And I think that, where we should start, and I mentioned in the column, is I would love to see Nick Saban along with some, high other people across the board. We tackle football first. I feel like football is at the heart of it. Then maybe eventually go into basketball. Take it sport by sport. Go with the major sports first. Try to start something small there as far as a commission to regulate. And Nick Saban also brought it up, that every state has its own laws when it comes to certain things. And how do we navigate that in order to NIL? And he talked about, once again, and I think a lot of people share that sentiment, including me, we can't really regulate it across the board until we have something that, as he mentioned, commerce, like a commerce kind of thing across the board. So again, Nick Saban bringing up a lot of points, and I'm glad he kind of brought clarification to the whole thing, and really nipped it in the bud as far as it, because it was good to hear him see that this might not be the direction we need to go in. We may need to start smaller and target certain areas before we start tackling this big beast that just keeps unraveling and unraveling, but yet getting bigger and bigger without any signs of really tackling the problem of NIL and other things. Because again, Kirby Smart talked a little bit about it today when he was asked on, on the show when he was golfing and things today, how he felt about, the way Miami utilized NIL and so forth, basically, to accrue, the number one offensive tackle in Jackson Campbell. And he kind of, and Kirby Smart kind of said, basically that it's a problem, that it's a problem and we need to regulate it. But let's be real here. Had it been Georgia that secured him, he would not be saying that, NIL was a disadvantage. So again, when it doesn't work out for some people, they're going to be a little bit hurt about it, and all these kind of things. But again, going back to that, there's a lot of regulation that has to be done. But I think that we have to do it in small components, trying to tackle everything that's going on in college football and college sports and in recruiting especially. It's never going to get done because there's just too much going on at the moment.
I think what has to be addressed first is, what is the problem? I think that your average college football fan is uncomfortable with the salaries or the NIL benefits. I shouldn't call them salaries. The average college football fan it has an issue, obviously, with player movement to the degree that it is. And I think that's basically where we stand. Now, it's one thing to be irritated and annoyed at something. It's another thing to deem that illegal or unconstitutional. And I don't think that's the case. I don't know that we can really put a cap on what type of gifts and benefits these players can receive from outside resources, from boosters, from companies. Now, in regards to regulating the amount of money that is paid, which is going to start this fall, in regards to a salary cap, that is one thing, because that's tied directly to the sport and the revenue that's brought in. And you can build a business model and say, just like any reasonable company says, okay, if we make $1 million, we can devote 30% of it to income or to payroll and 30% to operations, et cetera, down. And it's tied just like the NFL. When the NFL, when their income increases in any particular given year by 3%, then out of that 3% increase, a certain percentage goes to the players and the salary cap goes up, and the others deemed to operations and so forth and so on, because it's a business model. We don't have a business model in the sport because it's never been deemed a business, even though it is a business.
And I think that's what we talked a little bit about last week on the show, is why programs like Kentucky and their athletic department are trying to make that push now to be able to form at their athletic departments as LLC, so they can operate in such a way to start being able to accrue funds and try to go different avenues in order to get these investments, in order to get these things that they're trying to acquire via recruiting and other anything to build, because of all the, all the gray area that they're trying to work through and ways to navigate. Like I said, Kirby Smart is here talking about NIL and, how Miami, may have misused it, or, just kind of alluding, not directly saying that. Yet we talked about it last week, in the acquisition of Jared Curtis, you could easily argue that Georgia found a loophole using NIL in the same way, and a different advantage to acquire Jared Curtis to basically a pay for play kind of thing, that his 30-year contract would be determined on how he played in his first and his second year. So again, it's really interesting to see how, the back and forth goes when it comes to all these things. But again, like Mark says, it's like we say, we got to address the problem first and identify the problem. And I think now we really have to accept that football is transitioning to a business model, and we're going to see more of it turn not only to a business model, but to operate like the NFL does.
Look, I just want some direction going forward. I don't think we should miss. I want some leadership. And honestly, I'm at the point where anybody, Democrat, Republican, straight, gay, trans, whatever, black, white, yellow, brown, orange, purple, Martian, human, says, you're czar of college football. Do whatever you want. I'll be fine with that. And they could literally say, hey, Akron's going to win the national championship next year. That's fine with me. At least we got some direction going forward. This is the worst spot I feel in, where we have literally no direction. So if Nick Saban just said, hey, guys, the SEC and Big Ten's the only thing that matters. You all are now G8 programs. And guess what? Recruiting capped at $10 million. And figure it out in the court system. The court system, just figure it all out, have a massive court battle for 2 years. Hey, at least we're going somewhere. That's where I'm at with it.
No, I'm right there with you. I think that who's going to be the one or the group of people that are going to take a stand and be like, hey, this is how we're going to nip it in the bud and make that initiative. Yeah, it would be really nice if we had some direction. And there was something, like I said, we may not have this commission of college sports come through now with what we hear from Nick Saban, but man, the role I really would like to see Nick Saban, or along with some other top guys, not just in the football field, but maybe in the basketball field, that are experienced veterans, retired, is run, a college football commission, and Nick Saban headed up, or some other names throwing out there to get some direction and start there with college football and college basketball.
Mark, are you fine just in pointing in a leader? It can literally be anybody. It could be the spokes candies from the M&M for I don't care. I literally don't care who it is. It doesn't even have to be a real person at this point. I just want somebody.
You don't care, Daryl. I don't believe that, but you don't care at this point. I care who it is. I want somebody that's capable of running the sport, whether that's a committee, a governing body, or that's an individual as a commissioner. Yes, I want somebody capable, not just anybody. I want somebody that's capable. And again,
okay, let's just say they say,
yes.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, let's say they say Kansas State, you're a head coach. Boom, you're now the commissioner of you're the commissioner of college football. Is that level fine with you, or does it have to be somebody like at the absolute top? Could it just be somebody with some knowledge of college football?
Well, they don't have to be at the top of the chain. They need to be capable. So there are head coaches who would be capable, and athletic directors who would be capable, and others who would not. But again, I believe that the issues are, number one, there is no leader of the sport. There is no leadership in the sport. And I've said this a million times. Nothing showed us that more than the COVID season, because everybody scattered and did whatever they wanted and just kind of figured it out. And there was no commissioner, there was no governing body to say, this is how we're going to proceed. We've got a pandemic. This is how it needs to be addressed. This is the testing that needs to be involved. Then we're going to get past this barrier, and then we're going to deem the situation capable of play, and then we're going to roll it out. And then obviously we have to deal with different areas of the country that may be hit more severely and so forth. No, we just had every conference commissioner. The conference commissioners run the sport. They are the ones that decided what happened. And depending on how much pressure that they got from the administrators within that conference and how much of a football leaning conference it was versus academic or social leaning conference, then we saw all that play out. And that showed us where the sport is. The conference commissioners determine what goes on in the sport. And unfortunately, they work for a conference. They don't work for the sport. So Greg Sankey's not paid to do what's best for college football. He's paid to do what's best for the SEC and Tony Petitti with the Big Ten in particular. And since they've got the most eyeballs on them and the most money, then they're going to do what's best for the Big Ten and the SEC. And that's why we're veering off in a certain direction. So that's point number one. Get a capable person in charge or a governing body in charge. And then number two, I think the two most the points that really drive at the heart of the sport right now are number one, player movement. And nobody that's reasonable out there would be against player movement, but there got to be guardrails on the player movement. And then point number two would be the flow of money, differentiating revenue that comes into the sport via TV rights, what's at the gate versus NIL, and how do those both get treated differently? And that's the core of the problem as I see it, and the three buckets that need to be addressed.
Right, but I feel like there's also a timing thing with this as well, because we need this addressed like immediately. The longer we wait, the less time it is. And with bureaucracy and universities involved, this is going to take years for it to be settled out. I mean, look at we're asking Congress for help. You know what Congress does? I don't know what they do, to be honest with you.
Well,
They're just
Congress
there.
Congress doesn't necessarily need to be involved, or the president, but somebody that knows the law needs to be involved. And the big stumbling block is everything that LeeAnn just pointed out, and that Nick Saban talked about, is that you've got federal laws, but then you've got all these state laws that are so significantly different that it makes it so difficult for that to be managed. I think that's going to be the most complicated portion of all of this, or probably should be.
And that's why I was saying you're going to need Congress involved to kind of rein in and have one unified vision. Because if you have a bunch of different state laws in there that have conflicting things, you can't really manage the sport.
Well, it's not unlike other sports. If a player leaves Buffalo and then goes to play in Los Angeles, then, you know, his income is treated differently.
Right, but the difference is in some states the universities are allowed to pay. So it'd be like having a team, and the Buffalo Bills are allowed to pay Josh Allen $200 million, where the Los Angeles Rams are only allowed to pay him $150 million. The actual structure is different.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I thought LeeAnn was going to say something.
Well, it triggered something because I was thinking about it, for example, like in the state of Mississippi, you know, the way that the state pays, you know, employees at the state. And there's always that question, you know, when Lane Kiffin was getting his contract extension, that for the state of Mississippi, you can only allow a contract to be signed for X amount of terms before there's an extension. So, you know, and those are like, and again, those are another state rules. And like Mark was alluding to, like you've alluded, that's one of the biggest things. I don't think it would be as difficult to try to get a universal system across, just similar to what, like Mark says, when a player, you know, is playing in Buffalo that gets traded to LA and all those kind of things. But I think where we get into a little bit of that crazy area as far as legalities is, you know, those state laws when you're talking about where we differentiate how we're paying players, where we're acquiring money and funds, contracts, because I think eventually at some point, in order to regulate, we're going to have that pay for play, or we're going to have to put players under extension, you know, contracts, and then we're going to have to talk about extensions for keeping players in order to control that player movement that has become such an issue. Because I think the only way to control player movement and regulation is also having to, you know, tie players down for X amount. Or then we get into the thing about talking about buyouts. You know, the UCLA is battling right now, you know, trying, you know, we know that Arkansas is trying to battle, you know, to recover that NIL left, you know, that they feel that they're entitled to due to the contracts and the legality. So I think that there's just so many so many ins and downs, but to try, I think where we start is like, again, is trying to identify, how we can make, some kind of universal thing. But I think where it gets really kind of, where it gets tricky is, you have all the state laws and everything when it comes to, as far as the business end of things, as far as players being treated as employees.
The biggest, well, I don't know if it's the biggest issue. One of the main components in this for me is that we're operating a business within a structure that's an amateur sport and it's academic oriented. So that's the way the sport grew up. It grew up within a structure as just an academic led sport, series of sports, and amateur play, and all of those rules were in play. And then it became a business within that, and it became a huge business within that, and it continued to be operated by the NCAAs as an amateur sport. But I don't know how you can get around it being a job at this point. I just think it's a job, and there is revenue being brought in, and the revenue is huge, and the revenue is soon to be distributed to the players. I don't know how you get around that not being income, and therefore it's a job. And the good thing about that, and I wouldn't have said this a few years ago because I was against the business aspect and I wanted it to stay an amateur sport, but I just don't think it's possible now, because basically Congress and the law is deemed that it can't be an amateur sport anymore. And so then the next hurdle is that how do you bring everybody under the same guidelines and rules? Because again, the schools do whatever they want and the conferences do whatever they want. And basically you need to bring it all under one structure and say, we are one business, and therefore now we can rein in the finances and not make it so haphazard in regards to who's going to pay who and what booster's going to jump in and throw 12 million at this athlete and so forth and so on. It can all be brought under one structure, just like it is in any other business.
And it's an interesting point, because I was looking at some of the comments. We talk about a new thing that a lot of stadiums have, especially the big conference stadiums, is now they sell alcohol during football games. So that's another question. That alcohol revenue, how does that get distributed? Does it go, because if you think about it, legality, are we using alcohol sales to pay underage players? If you look at it that way, I mean, that could be, I'm just looking at it from a legal standpoint, all the things that could possibly come up, that sports are benefiting for, using alcohol sales to pay players or to add revenue streams. And then it goes back to there's just so many, I feel like, slippery slopes, things that can be opened. And and it made me question, where's Mike Leach when you need him? Because I think that if we're going to talk about having somebody who could have a unique perspective, someone mentioned in the chat Mike Leach, and he would probably be one of my top guys for commissioner, not just because his quirkiness, his collegiate, his just sense in as a college football coach, but I think a lot of people don't realize that Mike Leach had a law degree and was very, very intelligent, which definitely resonated onto that football field. So, man, if Mike Leach was still alive, I'm sure that he could bring some interesting take. But again, that's just another question. We know that all these new revenue streams, programs, athletic departments are trying to find unique ways to do athletic streams. But yeah, that's a great point about how do you allocate alcohol sales. And we know that some of these collectives are also using not just alcohol sales, but they're also creating their own brand beers. When you go to Georgia, or when you go to Ole Miss, some of these collectives are partnering with local breweries to make local brews. That money raised goes back to these collectives at these universities. So again, you got underage players that can't crack open a beer legally, but you're selling, and we all most of us like to enjoy a beer or something, so I get it. But at the same time, when you look at it from a legality, when is someone going to bring that up? Is that going to be another thing? There's just so many hurdles, Daryl, that, just that we were trying to jump over. And I'm like you, I would like for someone to bring some kind of regulation, at least start trying to tackle some of the problems. But again, when you try to solve one problem, it seems like, especially from a recruiting NIL standpoint, there's always another one that's there lurking, ready to pop up.
So Edward in the chat, I think, represents a lot of college football fans and saying the problem is the transfer portal. Okay. The issue there, and this is what I was trying to point out a minute ago, is that there are certain things that we as fans could say, we think that's a problem. But if it's not, if it's been one of those items that just in recent years has been deemed to be illegal, meaning keeping these players at the same school, then it's not legal. There is freedom of choice, there is freedom of selection. Therefore, we can't do that unless we got a business. If we got a business, just like in the NFL, you get drafted by the Buffalo Bills. You know what? For the first 3 years of your career, you're playing for the Buffalo Bills and you got nothing you can. Now, I'm not saying we should get to a point where players are mandated to go to, okay, Jackson Cantwell, you're not going to Miami, you're going to Oregon because that's where we will never get to that point. They have to have freedom of choice. But once they've made that choice, they're signing a contract, and maybe that contract's for 1 year, maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 3 years, maybe it's 4 years. But they're signing a contract and they're going to stay at that school for a period of time, and there's going to be limited transfer portal. That's how I see it playing out, or at least maybe that's how I think it should be playing out.
I think the biggest frustration, I think the biggest frustration, just, to your point, as far as people with the transfer portal, I know from a high school recruiting perspective that, a lot of high school recruits feel that it's kind of made their job as recruits a lot tougher, because, and I hear it too, coaches, when we're looking for talent, it's always, let's go to the portal, let's go there first because you have that experience, you have that maturity, even if it's getting those kids from that FCS level versus, going to spend a ton of money, but there's a lot of high value, high players in the transfer portal. But I think it goes back to, that whole frustration where we've seen it a lot this season where kids off the portal, they transfer from one school, they're not even there for maybe a few weeks, maybe they make it through spring and they're off to another. I mean, we had that example of quarterback Pierce Clarkson. He was at Louisville, he transferred to Ole Miss in this last January portal, and he's already off to UCLA. So I think that's a big frustration that comes with the portal when you're talking about player movement, that there's really no way to keep these kids intact. But yet you're investing, but yet these programs are investing, boosters are investing money, and so they stay for a while and then they walk away. Some walk away with a good hefty NIL, contracts, and some don't. So it's just really interesting. Again, it's a lot to tackle on in a daily.
Yeah, I know. It feels like we need to find a happy medium. Like, I thought the NCAA had way too much power, and now it's completely flipped to where the players have way too much power. Same thing happened with the NBA, which is an actual business. The organization had all the power, and now players are moving left, right, and center, even the big star players, and it's like your average college football fan probably doesn't even follow recruiting anymore because their attitude's like, why should I? My player that I like who's 5-star, like, look at us. Goodwin, who was I think he was a defensive end or defensive lineman for Kentucky between us and Michigan State. Next year, boom, he transfers. One of our best players of all time transfers immediately the next season. It's like, well, what was the point of waiting, spending all this time hyping it up, trying to get him here? He's just going to leave the next season. And, for Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, LSU, all these schools that are in the top 1%, they have an embarrassment of riches. But for us plebs down here, they just transfer to a better school, and we're just basically a feeder institution.
Yeah, and something I know that between the SEC, obviously, when you're an SEC transfer, you can't transfer to another SEC program, and then you also have to sit out. But similar to what they do, and that's something maybe we have to look closer on. I know that in Texas high school football in particular, when a kid transfers in, they cannot be on varsity. They have to sit out. So there's some of these top players that I recruit that are having to sit out and play sub varsity and get reps because that's just the law here in Texas as a high school recruit. So, but I think that's the biggest frustration, like you said, when players can just jump from, I think I was talking about it with Kentucky when you guys had that guy, and I think you guys hit on it yesterday a little bit on the show about, he was committed to Kentucky off the transfer portal and then decided he was going to go, into the draft or something like that. I can't remember the receiver's name offhand, but there's just a lot of situations that we're facing that more and more, and it's just and again, when cover basketball too. It's hard to keep up with basketball because, like you mentioned, basketball is a whole other level when it comes to the movement and recruiting and all
Oh
kinds
yeah.
of things. That's really, I mean, I think basketball has been able to navigate it because I feel like what we're dealing with in football now has been in the basketball world, kind of under the table for a long time.
Oh yeah, and I'll tell you how. From what I understand of what players do to get around it is they'll just say, "Hey, I'm from Texas. I want to go to Ole Miss. I'm going to stop at Kansas State. Kansas State's going to accept me because I'm a 4-star player. I'm legit. I'll be one of their best players. But I'm really dipping to Ole Miss. So then they just transfer immediately to Ole Miss in the spring window, and they're like, they get around it because their last school technically wasn't an SEC school, but they never played a single rep at Kansas State or some other Big 12, ACC, Big 10 school.
Yeah, and that goes back to the argument too. We talk about the players navigating, but a lot of the things that I've seen behind the scenes, and this is not speaking for every agent. There's a lot of good agents out there putting these kids in good directions, but we also, especially as we see in the lower ranks, the lower tiers, there's a lot of agents that don't have a lot of experience background, and that's kind of putting a damper on a lot of things. We see a lot of these agents roster shopping, as they like to call it. Some programs that I've talked to outside the SEC, ranks with staffers in them, say that's been a big concern, where there's kids that aren't even really interested to real in move. They like the situation they have at their current program, at their current conference, but a lot of the times these agents that are representing them, they have a roster, let's say maybe of 10 to 20 guys, and they're roster shopping. They're looking at other programs that might need to fill a need or a void instantly and might be offering a top dollar, and they're kind of putting in the ears of those programs like, hey, I have a kid here. He's right here. This is what he's doing, where that kid may not even be showing interest. So it's not necessarily all the time what meets the eye. It's not necessarily the kids that are doing this. Sometimes it's even the agents or the people that are handling the business end of things for these kids that are trying to make these kind of deals, which is a sad state when you look at it, but also a very dark side and reality of where recruiting's going, at
Yeah, I
any
know.
level, not just at the portal level.
I feel bad for Nico Amalevu from Tennessee. I mean, his whole career's basically over. I mean, honestly, him moving to UCLA, I'm worried he may not even get drafted because UCLA is an irrelevant team. They're the second best team in LA, for goodness sake. They're projected to win only 5.5 games. He's probably going to have a pretty horrendous year. I mean, since he's a quarterback, he'll probably get drafted late, but he won't nearly get as drafted as highly as he was at Tennessee because Tennessee's made for the quarterback. So I think a lot of these agents you're talking about are also sacrificing these players' futures for their own gain.
Yeah, I mean, it's not it's a crazy landscape out there. I mean, I've been recruiting for a long time and covering recruiting for a long time, but I would say these last 2 years have definitely just been a huge overhaul. And just with the kids that I deal with at different levels, from no names to 5 stars, coming from big programs, and like I said, now it's trickling down even to the high school thing. So like Mark said, there's really no amateurism left in football as far as college is concerned. I mean, as much as we say that we want to keep it that way, it's really just not heading. It's heading in a different direction now. Speaking on UCLA and what's going on there with that situation, there, Pierce Clark. Speaking of Pierce Clarkson, I mean, now, I mean, UCLA's got themselves a saturated quarterback room at the moment. But this either could swing one way. The acquisition of the Amlavea family, in Nico and Madden, might not necessarily be the worst thing for UCLA. And I talk about this, Daryl, from a recruiting standpoint, because while it didn't go the way it went at Tennessee, and UCLA is not set up to be that powerhouse, this could also create a lot of recruiting momentum being able to land. And we see UCLA picking up a little bit of steam on the recruiting trail because again, UCLA may not be the ideal landing spot, but why a lot of top tier guys might be interested in a place like UCLA is because these are guys that may not want to stay for 4 years anymore. We got to be the reality. That's the reality we live in. That a lot of these elite kids aren't going to make it through the 3 or 4 years, and some do, just depending on the deal. So UCLA, if I'm UCLA, I'm using this momentum and building on this momentum and trying to go out there and recruit some kids that maybe I can build a roster on. It may be a one and done roster, but at least it gives the program a little bit momentum. Now, is it going to happen overnight? No, but UCLA could easily surge with this type of momentum in acquiring the Amalavea family. We're already seeing it in that QB room. So it'll be interesting to see the direction it goes in heading to these official visits. But again, UCLA could very well be a hub like some of these other schools that we're seeing, like Syracuse having a surge in recruiting, because top players don't want to go to a saturated place anymore, regardless if it's Alabama or Oregon, because they want to be instant impact players, Darrell. They want to get to a place where they have the opportunity not just to develop, but where they're going to be seen and wait. If not, they're going to move on to the next one. Because at the end of the day, for those kids that have a dream of going to the NFL, or maybe using their current school as a stepping stone to get to their dream school, what do they need? They need live reps, not sitting on the bench, not getting a snap on one play. So places like UCLA, Syracuse, we're going to see a surge in those programs because they have open spots. They need top players now, and they're willing to throw top dollars out, maybe not across the board, but for an elite player.
All right, Darrell. Anything else, man?
No, I think this was a good talk, and I greatly appreciated the conversation. I just hope somebody gets appointed czar of college football soon. We'll take that hat behind LeeAnn Herring. I'll take anything at this point. Please, somebody, just give us direction. That's all I'm asking for. We're like those blind mice in Shrek that are just walking around there thinking they're at home, but they're on the record player and they've literally made no progress. That's what I feel like.
Good stuff, Darrell. You have a good night,
Thank you
man.
for having me on.
Of course. All right. Jackson's stopping by too. Look at this. Jackson, what's up?
Not much. How y'all doing tonight?
Doing well.
Oh man, I think we'll have to create like a support group for Adam, Coach Burtz, and Darrell, because they'll have a great time venting to one another about the state of college football. But
yeah, it is a crazy state and a lot of turning, but I'm sure your ears were ringing earlier. I was talking a little bit of Alabama football because it looks like Ty Simpson is heading in that quarterback room like we all had imagined. I'm still secretly cheering for Keelan Russell, trying not to be partial, but I think Alabama fans better watch out, because when Keelan Russell gets his opportunity, things are going to shake up in Tuscaloosa.
oh yeah. Well, and y'all heard about the news of Xavier Griffin decommitting from USC. He's got Alabama as one of his options, so that's going to be a win there if we can get him.
And we were just talking about Xavier Griffin and USC. I think maybe it was on one of our recruiting coops, or one of the name was, like I said, as the dominoes start to fall, as I like to say, as the visits start to go, official visit season is on hand, Jackson. All the things, everybody is free for all. There's a lot of programs trying to pick and pluck right now.
Oh yeah. I mean, we'll wait and see what happens, but it's just if USC's not having a good year in 2025, I would not be surprised there's several more decommits from there. It's like, no, why don't we be tied to that? No. It's like you gotta travel.
Yeah,
go ahead.
It's a, like I like to say, keep it simple. It's a long wait till December. We already see it here, just in the last 24 hours that, plenty big programs, even with big NIL money, are going head to head battling, trying to flip it again. There's a lot of kids that are, I think, within this next weekend. Don't be surprised if we see a lot of more decommitments across the board. It's just that time, like I said, as kids take official visits, as dominoes and the recruiting thing. I think this, we were talking about it earlier, Jackson. We talked a little bit about it yesterday. Georgia may have missed out on Jackson Cantwell. Oregon may have missed out on Jackson Cantwell, but with this domino falling, such a big piece. Now I think it's really shifted the focus for programs like Georgia and Oregon to settle in a good state. We talked a little bit about the next top 5-star plus Emmanuel Anacho, setting himself up. Of course, we know that he was big on the board for some of these schools. But now I think that this allows Oregon to really shift their focus in trying to land him. And we're hearing a lot of good things. So again, I think in the next 24 hours, especially heading into the weekends, a lot of big recruiting is going, and dominoes are going to fall. And like I said, I expect a lot of decommitments and possibly flips this weekend. Big, there's been a lot of recruiting weekends, but I think this is really the one where that we're ending, kind of coming off spring practice. Coaches already been on the road, a lot of in-home visits being made. So we're going to see where the dynamics are going to shift, especially in the SEC. There's always something brewing.
Well, and I will say, like, Jackson Cantwell committing to Miami, that's a huge win for him. But the question is, are we going to continue seeing them blow that one game that they shouldn't lose, which something tells me yes, especially when you got to go to Virginia Tech or you got to go to
Yeah.
Pitt and when Georgia Tech's back on your schedule.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit of what's next for Miami, and Miami's, going for the big guys. They're going for the big guns. Most of the, the guys that I mentioned, Mark, I mean, they were the number 1, number 2, number 3. I don't think there was anybody below the 5. Number 5 overall in this 2026 class. Miami's really taking a risk. They are going all in with a lot of young talent, versus going to the transfer portal. They did make some big acquisitions, but I think Mario Cristobal's vision is trying to look for as basically they got nothing to lose down Miami. If they gotta go anywhere but up, they definitely have that bankroll. And I think that they're trying to get that momentum and really build from a high school recruiting standpoint, trying to get the stars out of this 2026 pool and hoping to keep that momentum and that longevity. But we'll see again. Is it going to work out for them this time, or this young talent going to pan out or translate, or is it going to be a bust? We will see in just a couple weeks.
Agreed. LeeAnn, how you feeling about Tennessee, by the way?
Well, do you want to hear my impartial or my partial feelings about it? I'm not the biggest fan of Tennessee, but I will give credit where it's due. There's a lot. I think that after everything that happened as far as the quarterback situation, it did put a lot of strain on the program. But I think Tennessee always has a way of rebounding, and I think that's just what they have to do here. And that's exactly what they're doing on the recruiting trail. I think really across the board, whether it be SEC, ACC conferences, we really didn't get much of spring. So for me to sit here and talk and say Tennessee's going to be really good or really bad, same thing as if I'm talking about Alabama. From what I hear from the inside from the programs that I'm close with or I watch with, the key thing I think that the focus is shifting in this off season is addressing the areas of need. And I think that in this summer, especially with the way the recruiting calendar is shaping up to be, and the little bit of change of not having that full July session, that the bulk of it is really having to address the needs. Jackson, right now in late May and of course June, those first 3 weeks are going to be monster. I think we're going to tell a lot about how the stage is going to be set with those first 3 weeks of June, with the camps, with the recruiting and this official visit season. So again, I think Tennessee is in good shape. I think that they're like any SEC team, you gotta shake it off when you go through those kind of turmoils, because you can say what you want, as much composure as you are built in when you're an SEC team to deal with those kind of situations. They put a strain on your team. They put a strain on your program. That energy, I believe, resonates on the field. And sometimes in those situations, we see that it can either rally the troops up, or it can cause a mass exodus. We saw, back-to-back seasons at Texas A&M having those high elite profile recruiting classes, and then it just not pan out. And is it finally going to be that year for Mike Elko? Is it finally going to be that year for Texas A&M? And I think that's really where we are across the board. For me, it's when we see, as far as the recruiting standpoint goes, how things settle mid-June. But I think as far as where we see a program is when we hit those first snaps in those first couple of weeks, in those preseason games, as I like to call them, because I think that's the direction we're going to, is preseason games, which I would love to see, in college football. If we're going to kick in that NFL model, I would like to see those first 2 weeks of those non-conference schedules be the opportunity, like we see in the NFL, working those young guys, working those kids that we don't really know about, see where they stand, and then go from there. But again, I don't believe that we'll really get to know where any team really stands until we see them play a couple of downs of football outside spring ball, or team reps and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I've got an idea on how we can dominate Tennessee together. Let's get Ole Miss at the Voice of College Football to 1,000 subs. Let's get all the ACC channels rocking and rolling. Tell your friends, family, and cashiers pubs about the magic that Mark, LeeAnn, and Ruby bring on Ole Miss at the Voice of College Football, and the magic that Mark and LeeAnn bring on the Move Wednesday nights on Recruiting at the Voice of College Football. And call the Paul Feinbaum Show to let everybody know that you want to see Mark and LeeAnn on the Feinbaum Show. That show's on 2 to 6 p.m. Central Time, 3 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And remember, it's like Mark Rogers said on February 24th of 2025 on the State of the Voice College Football Address, LeeAnn Herring is the Patrick Mahomes of recruiting insiders.
Well,
that came from me originally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
And I remember you said it on the State of the Voice College Football Address, and that is something everybody needs to remember.
Okay. Wow.
Well, I know Mark is always bragging that I'm quite the closer, but I think Jackson over there, you are quite the closer. And you can close for us anytime on the show. Appreciate that. And of course, if you want all the latest in Alabama football, or you want to get a little bit of college football after dark, check out Jackson and his crew over on the Voice of College Football on the Alabama Crimson Tide, bringing you all the latest and all the greatest down from Tuscaloosa. Roll Tide, roll.
Roll Tide, roll. Yeah, because Texas is in the SEC title. Yeah, they were the last SEC team, but we got to show Texas and Oklahoma that we still run the SEC.
I still catch myself calling Texas and Oklahoma teams Big 12 teams. Even when I was talking to folks down in Houston the other day, I still haven't made that mental transition of Texas and OU. So I always have to remember when I prep for Texas OU that they are now part of our SEC conference. So I always have to be careful that I don't slip up. But again, like I said, exciting things going on, exciting what's going on in Alabama. Probably the only time you'll ever see me wear an Alabama jersey is probably a Keelan Russell jersey. But it's always exciting to see it, and it's really great to see. It's really great to see as far as the recruiting. I know that there was always, I know in the SEC, and I don't know how the Alabama fans are, but I know sometimes the Ole Miss fans and some of the other SEC schools, there was always at once this hesitation. We have more than one quarterback, but I feel like now in the direction that we're going, if you don't have more than one quarterback, if you don't have a veteran, if you don't have a young guy, and you don't have some guy from the transfer portal, you are not surviving in the SEC down the long haul.
No, you aren't. And everyone, I'll be seeing y'all later. Y'all stay safe, stay cool, stay away from that Bama heat.
Good to see you, Jackson.
Good to
Appreciate
see
it,
you,
man.
Jackson.
You too,
Thanks.
Mark, and good to see you too, LeeAnn.
Always.
Jackson remains our number one promoter by far. He's the guy.
He
All
has
right, we got
got
a
it
couple
down
other.
to an art.
Yes, he does. We've got a couple other mainstays standing by. So I got to say that from a standpoint of driving the traffic and figuring out what's going on here, I'm a bit mystified that we've got apparently 75 people watching us right now total. But it looks like nobody's watching us on YouTube, according to what YouTube's showing me, although there's like 20 or 25 people like commenting in the chat. So there have to be more than like YouTube's telling us that like 6 people are watching, but there's like 25 people commenting in the chat. So I don't know how that's possible. So anyway, we will go a bit rapid fire on the last couple here. We got George stopping by. George, I hate the abuse that you took during the Miami show. I know you don't give a damn.
Hey, do you notice? You notice I ignore them. I don't get involved. I don't respond to their, quirky statements. I just keep talking trash. Screw them.
Well, I just pointed out that the one guy called you a dumbass about 42 times, and I was about to call him out.
They tried to get my goat. They tried to get my goat, man. I didn't get
dealt
involved.
with way too much in life to be swayed by a bunch of knuckleheads behind a laptop.
I don't screw around with people named Malik Shalik Harama or Muhammad, whatever. I don't know who I'm talking to. They might track me down on the side. I just let that shit go.
What's on your mind tonight, George?
Well, I would like to do, you can't do this on a calculator. You can't go 8 trillion divided by 90, but you can ask the internet and it'll tell you. This freaking artificial intelligence is something else. Anyway, so let's figure it out real quick. You got some AI working there for you? How many football teams are there? I want to know how many football teams times how much money per player, how much money per coach, how much for facilities, clean socks, health care, food, housing, trucks, automobiles, airplanes, trains, buses. Come on. I know we're at 8 trillion already. Where's this money coming from?
It's coming from the TV
fucking-
networks.
It's got to be bigger than that. It's Rothschild or somebody. The Black Pope. Who's doing this shit? Who's paying to fly Rutgers to play USC?
It's got to be that
Can't
one
believe what I'm with.
Rutgers. It's got to be that one Rutgers alumni that's still living in glory years. I mean, that's really the direction, George. It's really the direct, and that's what we're talking about. I think we hit a little bit on the show yesterday. I think now athletic departments, not just football programs that tended to bring in the most revenue for most universities, now they're having to look for creative ways. We've been talking about it over and over again. Kentucky has been at the forefront. Kentucky may not be winning a lot of ball games as far as football, but they are definitely trying to stay ahead of the game and try to continue to compete in the SEC. Again, with that whole new initiative of Champions Blue, basically we've talked about how they've been proposed to their board of trustees to basically turn in the entire athletic department, not just what deals with the football aspect or the basketball aspect, into an LLC. That way they can be able to operate in such. That way they can stay ahead of things, because like you said, where is all this stuff coming from? Because it's not just coming from TV contracts, it's coming from all types of creative sources. But like I mentioned, when you got all the same programs tapping and drilling all the same wells, like we say down here in Texas, as far as that oil, which I mean is where we're trying to get that money, where are you going to turn to? Because at one point all those reservoirs are going to dry out. Now programs are having to look at, even programs like Kentucky, they're trying to get ahead of the game before everyone's jumping in, because they know that this is going to be an arms race, but it's going to be an arms race for finances. It's going to be an arms race to try to get the most funds, to secure those elite facilities, to continue to make those NIL thrives, to make those planes, to make these things throw. So again, it's a circus. It's a circus, but it's interesting to see where we're headed now. Again, like I said, Kentucky taking that initiative to turn its athletic department into LLC. That way they can pay and acquire revenue through creative sources. One of the mentioned proposed things that they're talking about is being able to dig into real estate. That way they can use real estate acquired to be able to fund. So again, we're talking about having to think beyond the box just to survive. If Kentucky's already in that mode, imagine what bigger programs who will have a lot more boosters and money at their disposal are cooking up behind. We're not
I love
hearing about
Kentucky. I love Kentucky, and I'm really happy for them. After 35 years, they beat us twice, I think. They built some beautiful facilities. You have stability with your coach. You're a blue blood basketball school. I'm happy for them. I think Kentucky is one of the few states that might be doing it right. You got that old moonshine money, and that's what it is. It's a bunch of moonshiners. I'm good. I'm glad. I'm good with that. That's work. Anything but BlackRock.
I am glad to see Kentucky on the rise. That was my first home as far as covering sports. I started off covering Kentucky basketball, and then had the privilege of trying to make Kentucky football on the surge. Of course, when I started covering there, it was Joker Phillips. So definitely it was not a football school. Football was just.
Hey, have you ever had?
I've really loved. Oh, sorry.
Have you ever had this shit called white lightning?
Yes, I have.
It's clear. Exactly, comes in a mason jar.
Yes,
I've
I've had the privilege of tasting plenty of that and bourbon countries, of course, legal of age. During my
Always,
time at Kentucky,
always,
always.
always, always inhale before you take a sip, so your first breath is out. Because if you
Oh yeah,
inhale,
that
you're in
it will
trouble.
hit
You
you.
know.
Oh yes, it will hit you. But you did hit. I know Kentucky might be taking
Spontaneous
advantage of the
combustion.
moon. It is. It is something when you that stuff will hit you a lot differently than some of that bourbon that's down there in Kentucky. But again, Kentucky is one of those programs that may not have a lot of luxuries, but you got to like the way they're handling. They're trying to think ahead, and I think that's the mentality that a lot of programs are going to have to head into because. Like we talked a lot about, and Mark mentioned it, at one point we were all in the arms race for elite facilities, but now even the FCS schools have elite facilities. I go back to Brown and I see the facilities that we had that we championed for over 11 years, getting lights and all these things. Now that's just something that you have to have in order just to be able to hang with it.
Right.
So now everything shifts to how do we keep NIL floating? How do we keep top facilities? How do we keep attracting? But like I say in recruiting, when everybody's got these top-notch things, how do we separate ourselves to get ahead of the game? And I think that's the biggest step. That's the biggest question. Where do we go from here? That a lot of programs are facing on the recruiting trail, and just to stay afloat because there's just so many revolving doors that are constantly changing. Like we were talking with Jareel, when you're trying to target one thing and trying to nip one thing in the bud, here comes another one. Here comes another thing, another issue just ready to sneak in and kind of make its way and creep in.
I've noticed that some states are warning about rolling blackouts. I hope that never happens in the middle of a football game. Can you imagine? It's 3rd and 3 at the 11. Boop, there goes the electric. Anyhow, New Jersey, Michigan, a couple states warned about rolling blackouts. And they want everybody to go on the grid electrically because your gas stove is against nature. Why are we playing Rutgers and USC every year for no reason when no one cares? I don't understand. Why are we flying Oregon to Rutgers? I can't figure this one out. They want me to give up my leaf blower and my lawnmower and my gas stove and my gasoline car so Rutgers can play Oregon? Come on.
Yeah.
Something wrong.
Yeah, some of those schedules, when I look at them, I looked at it when I was talking about, Ole Miss early on. They always ask what was the formula of how Kentucky beat Ole Miss. I said aside from Kentucky's defense being extremely on that game, I felt like Ole Miss was still coasting. We were living off the high of having and I get it. Those preseason games, you want to wear out the kinks. You want to get your team on a high, but in my opinion, if you're playing in the SEC, you can't sleep. And I think Kentucky, and I always talk about it, that scheduling that Ole Miss set itself up from, it looked really great from afar, but when it came down to standing on business, it hurt them in the end because it put up a couple losses, but against Kentucky and of course those Florida Gators. But I do have to say that on that Florida Gator win, a lot of people underestimated the power of that Willis Water and DJ Lagway.
I know. Hey, it's called stealing signals. We can try to paint it any way we want, but it's called stealing signals. You had your signals. Well, I'm sure we do it at every opportunity. I can't prove that, but if we're not, there's something wrong. Steal their freaking signals. Yeah. Matter of fact, what's even better?
There's all sorts of
what's even better? What's even better is hack into their headphones. Just listen to the coaches talking. B93 on 4. Yeah. And then the coach holds up a sign on the sideline. Good shit, man. I love it.
They mic everybody up, and it's always interesting to see. And you'd be surprised that some of those mic up sections, what they can reveal if you pay close enough attention, especially when you got a scout, a recruit mentality. But I always find it interesting, especially on the SEC sidelines when you got all the assistants and analysts and like one different kind of color to be able to stand out. They're holding all the crazy signs, and it's always really interesting to see how play calling's done. But definitely crazy evolution of the game. We're definitely living in a different era of college football. And it's going to be interesting to see how this upcoming season and how things pan out.
Well, next time you're bored, sit down, list how many teams there are, how much a player, how much a coach, how much for the stadium, how much for the uniforms, how much for the shoes, how much for the food. I can go on and on. They have planes, helicopters, housing, girlfriends, weekends out, buy your parents a house. Where's this money coming from?
And those are things that are becoming. I was talking with some other insiders and people that work in programs outside the SEC, ACC. It's interesting to see what some of these kids, not just the high school kids, but some of these transfer portal kids are negotiating in their contracts. This is not just, here's a bag full of money, here's a car. There's a lot of other things going on. There was one contract that had that they wanted their parents and their family to be flown out, not on a commercial flight to every single home game, but on a private flight to and from wherever. So regardless if it was a home game or if it was away, that was one of the many stipulations. There's been real estate involved. There's, like you said, there's all sorts of things that are adding. And I guarantee you it's not just coming from that revenue or that stadium money. It's coming from a lot of boosters behind the scenes, and there's a lot of things going on. But yeah, that might be an interesting project to take on over a couple months this summer and see where we tally. But yeah, there's a lot. And think about it, when the coaches are on the road, evaluations, flights, travel, all that kind of stuff to go see these playmakers, there's a lot of accrued costs that are going on that these programs are going to have to start creative to get about how they're going to fund all these. Because again, when you got teams like Texas and Texas A&M going to battle with SMU and Baylor, even being in different conferences, they are all tapping on the same source to get that revenue. But again, that eventually is going to run out. So where are you going to go to next? That's the biggest race that we're in now. How are we going to stay up with the Joneses financially to keep all the luxuries we have and then acquire new ones to stay ahead of the game and separate themselves? So it's going to be an interesting off season, George. But we're how many weeks away? Where's Jackson?
If you and Mark want to get together with me, we can start a management agency. I'm going to ask for 40,000 shares of Berkshire Hathaway for all of our clients. And they can retire, whether you play a game in the NFL or not. Just give me 40,000 shares of Berkshire Hathaway.
Texas Tech has really, I know there's not a lot going on in Lubbock, and there's a lot of red dirt there if you've ever been to Lubbock, Texas. But man, what Texas Tech is doing as far as their NIL, I mean, they would really been pushing across the board, not just in football, but in college basketball. And what they're doing is basically creating a huge model. They started off with that offensive line NIL base, that it didn't matter where you were as far as the rankings of starts, whether you start, if you come to Texas Tech, you're getting a base X amount of salary just to be on that offensive line, whether you play a down of football or whether you sit there. Again, yeah, and those are all popping up now. Everybody wants to be an agent, because when it comes to NIL, it's very different than NFL, where you have to have, at least a legal background. You have to be certified and go through all those things. Man, you can pull up in Mississippi, Georgia, and say, hey, I'm going to pay the NIL fee, and all of a sudden I'm an NIL agent. No. And that's what's the dark side of it, George, is a lot of kids, even the top kids, are being navigated in this way by some people that are not in it for the right reasons. And they wonder why these kids are gonna lose all this. They may have athletic talent, but they're not being taught properly how to financially navigate through all these big deals and really learn is, because like I always tell the recruits I work with, remember, not everything is always glitter, glitters is always gold. You have to think about life after football. This could all happen tomorrow. Remember, you get hurt, coach leaves, something happens in the program, all this is gone tomorrow. And so you got to start thinking smart and ahead of the game. So again, yeah, I talked with it about Mark about an NIL agency and all that kind of stuff. So maybe in the distant future, we'll see.
It's going to get too complicated. 100-page contracts. If I was a kid, I would say, I just want the piece of paper to say I get 10,000 shares of Berkshire Hathaway, and y'all can do whatever you want. I'll pay my own health care. you know, because they're just the lawyers are going to eat these kids alive. This is like reparations for all the players that never got paid for 100 years. It's getting paid to these kids right now. It's a once in a lifetime chance. And I really do feel sorry for any of the kids who are getting ripped off or throwing their money away on bullshit. And you know what I mean? Because it's a once in a lifetime thing. $4 million a year for Carson Beck? Are you kidding me?
Well, and like we talked about, you know, we were talking about Jackson Cantwell, and we know, I mean, they were really transparent. This was one that, you know, that NIL indeed played a factor. We know he wanted to go to school that he was going to develop and all those kind of things. They checked off the boxes. Georgia checked off the box, Ohio State, Oregon, everybody did. But, you know, we were told that if you were going to put in an offer for him, that don't call unless you're going to at least put $2 million down. And we know that Miami had no problem putting that $2 million. And this is not over 3 years. This is over his freshman year, and then to be renegotiated following sophomore and so on as he stayed. But we were also talking that it was also possible that Miami put in 2.5 in NIL to secure this deal. So again, if you're talking about 2 to 2.5 mil in your first year as a freshman, as elite as you are, and again, you haven't translated onto that football field, that's taking a big risk and a dip step. This is a kid I think will translate. I think he's going to have some growing pains, but again, you can't do this for every 5-star kid, because we've seen it plenty of 4-star, high level 4-star, top level 5 stars, George, that don't pan out and translate it, and then you're out a player and you're out a ton of money.
I just realized how they're doing this. They're floating securities on the market. We can't go into it right now, but there's this, everything in America is debt. Debt is money. I think I just figured out how they're doing this, because it's more money than exists in the whole world to do this for 1,000 college football teams, or even 200 college football teams, thousands of players. It's just mind-boggling. But I know what they're doing. It's up at the Federal Reserve level, the open discount window. Anyway, that's where you take that virgin paper. Yeah.
This is why we always love you calling in, George. I always love you calling in, because you always bring these thought-provoking, like out of the box ideas. But when you think about it, it makes sense, because when you look at it, it's not so crazy after all.
Tech. You mentioned Texas Tech. Did we beat their ass and win the basketball tournament? And at Houston, that little scrappy Houston team, that was fun, wasn't it?
Oh, that was a crazy thing. I thought Houston was going to pull it out. I like Coach Sampson as a coach, and I think what they've built now, if only their football team could get a line. I always joke down there that, man, there is so much high school talent in Houston. There is no way that Houston should be going 4-6 with that kind of talent if you just built it on high school. But again, it was a good time. I had Houston winning it all. But like I said, sometimes that college basketball world, you never can tell.
My first 2 kids were born in Houston. When they were being born, 83, 84, 82, whatever it was, Akeem Olajuwon was there, and Clyde Drexler and Phi Slamma Jamma. I can't believe we lost that game. North Carolina State, Jim Valvano. My goodness,
you brought up Akeem Olajuwon, one of my favorite guys of all time. But I don't know if you got to see it during the tournament. I don't know what game it was. He was sitting down there. Oh, and when Houston won down there, they didn't let him, the guy, whoever the security or whoever the rep was, that they didn't let him go up there, and it caused a big old stir. I'm like, clearly you don't know who this man is. I was like, Houston basketball, and Houston would not be here if it was not for this man. Clearly, I get the protocol, but I think for once you can let the man pass, because I mean, you cannot talk Houston basketball without talking about Akeem Olajuwon. So I mean, I thought that was crazy. I had one of those moments that I was just like, wow, I can understand even me with a credential, you stop me, but you're really stopping Akeem Olajuwon down there. But anyway. Yeah, we'll see what college basketball does. There's a lot of things happening.
I was watching that when that happened. That was fun. And still to this day, I can't believe we won the basketball championship. We should have lost the last 3 games. I don't even know what happened. It's a blur. How did we win that?
Yeah.
It's
I feel like
unbelievable.
basketball. I feel like basketball, especially college hoops. I mean, when I write over for the Wildcat Wire, and most of my stuff is basketball. And I feel like, man, it's just a blur sometimes because it's just going. I always joke with some of the college football coaches and assistants, and when they talk about recruiting and NIL and how it's going and how it's navigating, I said, y'all need to go up and pull up, as you like to say, with some of the old school college hoops coaches, and I'm sure that they can give you a whole school lesson on how to navigate, because like I said, I learned a
I
lot.
know this is a.
I learned a lot of college basketball
I know this.
there.
I know this is a football channel, but before our team even got to our celebration day for basketball, Kentucky stole our best veteran, Aberdeen. They paid him, I don't know, $2, $3, $4 million. I just,
Oh yeah,
they did that,
like
right?
I said, when I learned a lot. I think that's how I've learned to navigate through this NIL era, and I gotta thank Larry Vaught down there for letting me cover college hoops and taking a chance on that, because I knew about college basketball, but man, I definitely had a whole new lesson when it came to how to operate in college sports, learning the behind the scenes over at Kentucky basketball when Coach Cal was there, and I was back there starting in 2010, 2011. So again, man, you want to
Nice.
talk about learning to navigate through NIL? Go talk with college basketball coaches and even assistants at the high school level, because man, hoops is a whole different atmosphere. And when it comes to recruiting down there, it was a whole different, definitely an eye opener for me.
So let me get this right. Kentucky's going to take 18 million of their 20 million and give it to the basketball team and give 2 million to the football team, or 16 and 4, something like that, right?
No.
Kentucky ain't gonna slide no more on basketball.
Well, that's exactly why they want to
that.
start. I guess that's exactly why they want to make themselves an LLC, so they can make moves like that, but then start getting stacks from other places, including acquiring real estate. I'm sure now with the thing is, horse racing might come into a play as far as how athletics and things like. I mean, there's just so many things that Kentucky could really get creative with the landscape and the makeup there of the type of investors and businesses they have around, that really could be a interesting take. Why? Hey, we're not selling NIL. We're not selling just value. Hey, let's go buy you a Kentucky Derby horse so you can be a part owner in a Kentucky Derby horse and start like that. I mean, I can already see the pitches if I'm going to Kentucky, what's going to be on the table, and I think that might be the new thing.
The LLC is fine as long the first word has to be irrevocable. It has to be inside of it, irrevocable private ecclesiastic trust, and then you don't pay taxes on shit. And teach that to the football players too.
There is always a loophole. You were like my grandmother. She always said there's always a loophole. You just have to learn how to scan it.
Irrevocable private ecclesiastic trust. You can go back and write it down later. They sell them. You have to do it yourself. A lawyer can't go do it for you. You got to do it. You got to be like, this is me doing it, because it's private. It's not public.
See, this is what I love. I learn a lot every day, and that's why I said I always enjoy you calling in, George, because you always have that out of the box, but not so not so off reality, not too far from it. It's an out of the box kind of thing, but man, it does make sense when you think about it in the grander scheme of things.
Yeah. Plus we have DJ Lagway. In common. We can't wait for football season to start to watch this kid.
Oh, well, you probably heard me talk about his teammate Jermaine Bishop going over to Texas, but man, I wouldn't be surprised. I know that Houston's been a dark horse in there, and and he's making a visit to USC, but never underestimate the power of relationships and recruiting. And I wouldn't be surprised if Florida tries to reunite DJ Lagway with his top guy for 3 years over at Willis, because I'm telling you, that Willis water, if nobody believes it by now, they should, because like I said, there are some freakish athletes being brought out of Willis, Texas. And I think Jermaine Bishop could eventually find his way down to Gainesville with the Florida Gators to reunite with DJ Lagway. Believe me, I'm
I
glad you
agree.
brought that up because that's a thought that I thought about. I know that Texas is making a push, but again, I talk about that unique chemistry and whether Jermaine Willis is playing corner or they put him back at receiver. He's played and he's been dynamic at both. Mark and I broke down his numbers earlier on the show. I mean, just putting him back in the same backfield with DJ Lagway, you cannot deny that there's going to be some magical chemistry there. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Florida Gators try to get in the hunt in the next couple of weeks and try to reunite those two, because I would like to see that. And I'm sure plenty of Florida Gators would like to see that too.
I just want to beat Miami, beat Georgia, win the SEC, and win the national championship, and I'll be fine.
That's it.
That's all I
Well, I'm
ask.
telling you, if it ever had a way on the shoulders, it'd be with DJ Lagway. But always thank you for calling in, George. We appreciate
Thanks,
it.
George. We appreciate it, man.
Love
We
you
need
guys
to move
tonight.
on. But
Bye.
you're our guy. We appreciate you.
Later, Gators.
All right. Adam is stopping by as our last call. Adam, good to see you.
Good to see you, Mark. LeeAnn, how are you doing?
We're
Doing good,
well.
doing good.
We do want to remind everyone that we've got a website here, vocfb.com, and that's what everyone is seeing there on the screen. So check it out. What you got, Adam?
Well, here are my proposals. So, universities should be entering into employment contracts with their recruits, and these employment contracts can be quite creative. They don't have to necessarily, they can be for a term of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, for whatever money. And we don't even need to have them as students, quite frankly. So employment contracts are going to do a few things. They're going to rein in their ability to transfer, and they're going to provide a remedy in the case of a breach. And in the case of a breach, a university would be able to file for injunctive relief, prohibiting that person from going to another team, which would cause irreparable harm to. So employment contracts is the way to go, and I'm not sure why we haven't already implemented that obvious solution. Second thing is the transfer portal. My idea for the transfer portal is that, yes, we would retain the transfer portal once a year, but you wouldn't be allowed to transfer to another college. The transfer portal would only be to transfer into the NFL, to have them draft you and go into the NFL. Why is that good? For two reasons. It puts the risk directly on the player, and it gives the player a clear indication of where they're at in their status as an NFL player in terms of their development. But I would abolish the transfer portal for lateral moves, which contracts through the breach provision would prevent. Why are we not doing this? I mean, I just had a horrible day today because I'm a lawyer, and you know what happens? I'll tell you what happens. All day, people argue with you over nothing, and it really stresses you out. So I'm thinking, why can't things be simpler? And here's a way to go. What are your thoughts?
No, I like I like the direction you're going about the employment contracts and how you see it, and I feel like we often make it too complicated, like you said, and keeping it simple, because I mean, I think the answers are right there in front of us. It's just who's going to be that one to say, hey, let's do it, let's just get it done, because you're not, you know it, when you're negotiating, no one's ever going to be 100% happy. There's no contract that's ever going to be 100% appeasable to both sides. But I think in the direction we're going, we're already doing small bits and pieces. We're already treating these kids as employees. We're putting them under NIL contracts. We know that some of those NIL contracts, Nico Amalea and that family, we know that they had, Arkansas trying to buy out them. So we know that these things exist. But like you said, why not put it under a uniform? I like where you're going with that direction. I think that it's pretty straightforward and simple. And I don't know why people are making it more difficult. And I get it. That pay to play and all those things and all those factors, but that's where we are in reality. Amateurism, like Mark said, in college football doesn't exist, or just in sports in general. The minute we started paying players and giving them incentives, that went out the door, and that's not coming back.
I agree with you. And I think the problem now is the power and the leverage is all with the players. The carefully drafted contracts are going to allocate the risk evenly. And that's going to lead to, a much more, let's say, egalitarian relationship between the schools and the players, because it's going to allow the schools to protect themselves against players who want to transfer. Well, you can't transfer because we're going to get injunctive relief on you, and you won't be able to play for, say, a year or so. And so it balances that while still paying the players. And then the transfer portal is then deemed obsolete. It is absolutely superfluous to have a transfer portal when the contract guards against that. But we'll give the transfer portal one opportunity. You want to go on the transfer portal? It's to the NFL only. What's wrong with doing
Now,
that?
let's say now if you that what you're saying about the players and under contract stuff, what happens if a coach is fired, if a coaches leave or something like that? How does that work in that contract? How is that a stipulation in there? Now, is that one of those things where if a head coach leaves or someone leaves, that these players will have a window to leave the program or to be able to get a buyout to go to another program, or how would that work if you don't have a portal or
Yeah.
something that's not going towards the NFL?
Yeah, great question. So that's going to be negotiated between the parties. It's either going to be a condition precedent in the contract, whereby the contract will be deemed null and void if the coach leaves, or they will negotiate the fact that the player has to stay even if the coach leaves. So that's going to depend on the negotiations between the parties. But I think the answer to this problem is not looking for a solution from Congress or the NCAA. It's looking for a solution right between the parties and giving them power of negotiation so that we don't have a Nico Emiliava situation and we don't have parents acting the way they are and universities, really struggling to get players when you have the Texas, the A&Ms and the Ohio States buying players. So how do we actually have a system where employment contracts are required as a condition of playing college football? Well, I suppose that maybe congressional intervention in that situation might be a good idea. As it stands now, it's not sustainable. And that's the only sustainable way to protect the university, but also protect the players, in my view.
And you mentioned about protecting the players, and kind of everyone's kind of hit on it. I've hit it a little bit, kind of from a legal standpoint. Adam, where do your feelings on, trying to tackle how NIL agents become NIL agents, because it's pretty much a wild, wild west out there. Like I said, every state has its own terms, but pretty much you or I can go out, you can go out wherever you are and what state you are, pay the NIL fee, and then you can operate. But there's no type of legal background needed. There's no type of certification. There's no type of NFL. So then you got these people that really don't have any background in negotiating contracts or talking on behalf of the party and these kids. What are your thoughts on trying to, how do we regulate the way who and how these people can regulate these contracts? And do you think that there should be some kind of what we do like with the NFL, some kind of certification eventually, so people are certified NIL agents and not mom and pop or anyone who just feels the need that they're going to represent or try to negotiate a $2.5 million yearly contract for this kid and try to, catch a lick off it, to put it lightly. What are your thoughts on that?
Two things. Number one, I'll make an analogy to the American Bar Association. You can't just be a lawyer. You can't, or the American Medical Association. You can't just be a doctor. There's like an accreditation and licensing process. So something truncated, something smaller than that is one possibility. The second possibility is you do nothing and you leave it to the parties and their negotiations. And again, that gives power to the universities to say, we're going to give you $4 million, or a year or whatever it may be. But negotiations will only be conducted with a certain number of people. And another thing is you're going to include anti-competition clauses in there that are going to be enforced. So the players are going to make money. They're going to be able to play where they want to play, but there's going to be restrictions on their mobility, which then renders the transfer portal totally unnecessary. But I do think there should be some type of certification process so you don't have these people running around who don't know what they're doing. If they're not willing, the only thing I think about that, though, is it's unlikely to happen because we have so many bureaucrats at the NCAA that don't know how to do anything. And it's like paralysis by analysis. And so I think ultimately I go back to my contract idea. That's part of the negotiations, and that gives power to both sides and requires both sides to compromise and seek moderation and middle ground.
Well, in terms of the contract status, that sounds like something I was talking about and have a number of times because, yes, we've got a academic amateur structure and we've got a business running within it, so it just doesn't work and hasn't worked. increasingly for quite some time. So I would agree with, and I'm speaking knowing that I'm confronting two legal minds here, and so I'm out of my league here. But I would think that although the employment contract status should be implemented, and I'm totally on board with that, and have been saying the same thing, that the complete elimination of the transfer portal and the access to transfer to other schools, I don't see how that could be legalized. I think you can limit it, just like free agency in the NFL. If you're going to make this a business, you can limit it. I don't think that freedom of choice and movement can be completely eliminated.
So if I work for Coca-Cola and I sign a contract, Coca-Cola can say, if you are terminated or if you decide to leave this job, you may not take with you, or you may not work with the competitor, Pepsi, and take with you any information about the ingredients that we use to make Coke, or if you work for Microsoft.
But if this is truly an overarching business, they're not competitors. It's like the NFL. Buffalo on the field is a competitor against Los Angeles, but they're not under the umbrella of the NFL. They are actually partners. So if this all became one business, then Ohio State and Michigan are partners. Ole Miss and Alabama are partners. They're not competitors. They are on the field, but they're not Coke and Pepsi. They're not different organizations.
So to borrow a legal phrase, I would say that that argument is true in theory, but fatal in fact, because it does not recognize the reality of what's going on. And the reality is they are competitors. And that's the whole reason why the contract negotiations are going to change the power dynamic, both for the schools and for the players, and offer universities players incentives, and through creative contract drafting, to both give players what they want, but restrict their ability to disrupt college football with things like Beck going for $4 million to Miami or Nico going to UCLA. That's the problem with college football. You have an imbalance in power. Contract negotiations are the way to go. Otherwise, you have a system of unregulated transactions that are completely not beholden to any rules. And that's another reason why employment contracts would be helpful, because they will be overseen by the courts according to common law principles. And that's the kind of regulation that you need, while also creating equality in bargaining power. Okay? So if I'm recruiting Arch Manning from whatever high school he went to in New Orleans, I think it was Newman. Okay? Well, you bet your ass I'm going to have a clause in there, an anti-competition clause. I'm also going to have an anti-competition clause is going to say many things. You cannot go to these schools. The remedy will be injunctive relief, and a variety of other things. But what happens with the player? The player also gets the benefit of predictability and stability and money. So we're not taking anything away from the player. We're just rebalancing the scales of justice, if you will.
Well, it sounds something similar to what the NFL and Major League Baseball used to operate under back in the 1960s and 70s. And then, of course, free agency broke and then became a different deal, but there was limitation placed on the free agency. So, and then the other thing with the transfer portal only going toward the NFL, of course, you need the NFL's cooperation in all of that. And right now, the NFL has an age requirement and an experience requirement for you to be eligible to play in the NFL. So you can't just be a freshman in college and say, hey, I want to go transfer to the NFL.
Well, I would disagree. I agree with you, but I would disagree with why that should be a rule. I mean, if you're leaving it up to contract negotiations, people are permitted to require in contracts others to give up certain constitutional protections. Not all of them, but certain of them. But these arbitrary rules, why can't you transfer to the NFL as a freshman? Why can't you? See, what's the rationale for this? The rationale, it seems to me, lacking. And when you have a rationale that's allowing players to transfer wherever they want, unfettered, and you don't have any contracts that provide limitations, that's why you see what you're seeing right now, instability, precisely what the law is designed to prevent.
I think that rule is in place to, number one, protect the player physically because he's not mature enough to play in the NFL, most likely. Not that there aren't exceptions, but it's also in number two, protection against the NFL of just the nuisance of dealing with the number of players that would try to enter the NFL versus the number of ones that are qualified. And that's one of the reasons why they instituted about 10 or 15 years ago a draft grade, because we had so many players that were connecting with and building relationships with unsavory agents that were filling their ears with all sorts of delusions of going to the NFL, and then they got undrafted and they didn't make a team, and then that was curbed by instituting an NFL draft grade where personnel directors would bring back a scouting report and they could give them a reasonable grade on their talent and viability in the NFL, and then a lot of players made a better choice then going forward.
So you're making an argument from a Supreme Court case in the 1940s called Lochner versus New York, in which the Supreme Court held that you could not regulate conditions in a bakery that were often lethal for their workers because workers had an independent right to do whatever they want. Now, Lochner has not been entirely debunked, and there is constitutional basis for saying people have the constitutional right to make bad choices, and having people come in and regulate contracts to say you can't do this or you can't do that because we're protecting your physical safety or we're doing it for some other salutary purpose. No.
We do that all the time. We protect people's safety. I can't run across the street unless there's a crosswalk.
Right. But my point is that with good lawyers and careful negotiations, that will fix itself. You have to let the market work. These solutions ultimately are not long-term solutions because maybe they'll guard against certain types of who knows. It's so speculative. Let people in the free market solve this problem. I mean, I'm a Chicago School of Economics type of guy. Let the free market do its job, and it will do its job.
Well, the free market was doing its job toward these players going to the NFL, but then we saw the disaster that ensued with these agents getting involved and players moving on to the NFL that were not prepared for the NFL, and 70 or 80% of them got rejected and didn't make a team, and it ruined their lives. So, yeah, there were stipulations and rules that were put in place to protect them. And again, the nuisance of the NFL, they were probably on board with it as well, because they didn't want their training camps flooded with 19-year-olds who couldn't play.
But if you take on a regulatory approach over a free market contract approach, that approach ultimately is not going to work because regulators are too slow to act. They are not going to be able to understand the nuances of individual situations like attorneys, university officials in a contract negotiation in a free market context. So the solution is not from the top down. I think it's from the bottom up.
Well, I think the last point we're arguing is not an issue right now. I think it's been fixed and it's fine.
Correct. I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, should we go my route or should we just say, look, it is what it is? I mean, because right now what you have is great inequity and you have no protections for universities and quite frankly, not even for players. So I would say to recruits, pay $1,000 an hour for the best lawyer you can find. Negotiate with the university. They will have great lawyers, and you will have a contract that is fair, and provisions of which are governed by common law and courts to guard against unconscionable provisions. So, I mean, letting the people resolve the problems in the free market to me is better than looking to regulatory agencies to solve the problem.
All
No,
right.
I mean, I see where you're coming with. Just to your point, real quick, to kind of wrap it up. As much as I think that we talk about trying to find a universal system, like you said, to try to get everyone to operate, it goes back to looking at states' rights. Every program, every conference has a different means, has a different governing body, has different things in playing factors. So I can understand where you're coming from as far as letting Ole Miss, negotiate Ole Miss and what they have to do in Mississippi and how that regulates and how that affects that, it's not going to be the same as you would negotiate a player contract in Syracuse. Different, doors, things moving around, moving parts and all that, to put it simply. So, I think there has to be some regulation. I think there has to be some form of contracts put down in there. Do I think it has to be completely across the board? Not maybe to start, but I think we definitely have to I think both parties, like you said, have to be protected. And the only way to do that, as we know from a legal standpoint, is putting it down on paper and it being paper. We hear all the time about, verbal commits, verbal things, but those don't stand the test of time. There's plenty of recruits out there that got 50 offers verbally, but that's not going to hold the test. That offer is not a committable offer right now. They're just verbal offers. We see these kids verbally committing, but we know that these kids are free for all. They're a free market. They're a free agency until December when they sign. So I think when you put something, I like the direction that you're going, as far as that at some point we're going to have to put things down in pen and paper, and it's going to have to be negotiated amidst the parties, because trying to get in a higher source, it's never going to get done. We see right now in the case of what's going on with the the court case battles, they're being stretched out. They're being stretched out, and they're going to be stretched out, and it's not going to get done. Versus where if we would have left it to a smaller parties, like you were saying, negotiates. I can see where it's coming. I think at some point we're going to have to put pen to paper, and we're going to have to get some contracts in there to serve some kind of purpose, and to, get the ball rolling and try to tackle the messiness that this has become.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And the last thing I'll say is people have to remember, when you're negotiating a contract, you are doing so in the context of legal frameworks. You cannot pay Jackson Dart $5 to play at Ole Miss. That will be an unconscionable contract in violation of law. So law adds a layer of protection to those negotiations. But guys, thanks so much for listening to me. I appreciate it. Nice to have a friendly conversation for the first time today and not deal with other lawyers.
Well, I think, like I said, it's always, I was talking with Mark, it's always good to have you on, because you bring, as a lawyer, legal standpoint, that's a lot of things and you bring it up, the direction, the way that college football is going. Like you said, if I'm a young kid and recruit, that's what I tell them. Like you said, go get yourself a high price, even if they're not, but go get yourself a good lawyer, because they have to be in the know. And I think too, we don't talk a lot. We talk a lot about the political landscape of college football, but there's a lot of legality that's going on behind the scenes in recruiting and everything. So always thank you for bringing that insight. Adam, appreciate it.
Thanks, LeeAnn. I appreciate it. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Adam. Good to see you.
You too.
Hope you have a better day tomorrow. All right. Well, I think we did it. And a lot of great calls out of all of you. So thanks for calling the show. We'll be back next Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And LeeAnn hopefully will be swinging by the Daily Show to drop some knowledge on a regular basis as well.
Thank you guys for making it a good 2.5 hours filled with politics, football, and a little bit everything in between. I think tomorrow for the recruiting coup, for all you Ole Miss fans, I know that some of our Ole Miss fans are tuning in, hoping to get the inside track. Just to give you a little bit of preview before we go, Ole Miss is back in the hunt for a 4-star Mizzou commit, Gavin Sadar. We got to talk a little bit with Sadar on his visit last night from Charlie Weiss. So Rebels, get excited. There may be a new QB and a flip brewing in the next couple weeks. But again, we'll be talking a little bit more about it tomorrow on the recruiting coup. And again, Lane Kiffin setting up for a huge recruiting weekend, hosting top tight end Mark Bauman, who's also in the race with some big guys. So again, a lot going on to Ole Miss. Sorry we didn't get to that here, but thank you guys for tuning in, and make sure you guys tune into the College Football Show tomorrow to get all the latest from Mark, and then of course all our recruiting update.